Chapter 46, A Fool. When Xie walked in from the outside, what he saw was such a scene. The entire Fengchen Hall was quiet for some reason, and everyone's eyes were in one direction, looking at the rightmost corner of the third row. The eldest princess of Liang did not sit in her place, but stood in this corner. Her eyes were red, and she wanted to cry, and she didn't know whether she was moved or wronged, and she was holding the slender hand of the girl in the corner tightly. And the girl? It's Zhang Xuning. Zhang Xuning's head was full of gains and losses at this time, and she didn't expect Xie voice to sound outside, until she saw his figure appear at the door of the hall, and she didn't react in hindsight. Xie looked at her hand being held by Shen Zai. There was a faint hint of thoughtfulness in that calm gaze. Zhang Xuning somehow felt a sudden chill on the back of his head, and the palm that he was looking at with his gaze had a feeling of being pierced by a sharp arrow, and the hairs on his back stood up for a while, and he quietly withdrew his palm completely subconsciously. God knows what Xie will think when he sees that they have a good relationship. What if you suspect that she wants to make trouble? Fortunately, Shen Zai's attention at the moment was also attracted by Xie, and she didn't notice this small detail, only raised a smile after a moment's pause, and took the initiative to bow down to Xie. I've seen Mr. Please say hello to gentlemen. Only then did the others salute in hindsight. Zhang Xuning also immediately got up from the seat and bowed to Xie. I've seen Mr. Xie. Xie retracted his gaze at this time, only glanced at Zhang Xuning, who buried his head low, and then walked in from outside the hall, passed by her again, stood in the middle of the front of the main hall, and said lightly, "No one is late, it's good. No need to be polite, just sit down." Everyone got up as he was told, and only then did they dare to look at him. Is still wearing a pale green robe, with green hairpins tied up in his hair, wide robes and large sleeves, and his clothes are still stained with the slight mist in late autumn and early winter, which looks transcendent, like a hermit in the mountains. But he didn't come alone. At this moment, he was accompanied into the temple by 4 gentlemen selected by the Hanlin Academy. 3 of them were old gentlemen who had been invigilated with Xie when he was taking the school examination in Fengchen Palace, and the other was the first time he had met, in his 40s, with a serious face and no smile, and he thought that he was later selected to teach the class. Zhang Xuning recognized the 3 in front of her at a glance. After all, it's only been a few days. She still remembers the perfunctory attitude and words of these 3 gentlemen when she took the school examination that day. Then his brow furrowed. Zhang Xuning remembered that she had said that she would beat these gentlemen's small reports, but she didn't have time yet. Xie said, "Today is the first day, and I expect that His Royal Highness and your companions are not familiar with the gentlemen, and they have not reviewed the book in advance. So after I discussed with several gentlemen, I will not attend classes today, but let everyone know Mr. Hizzy, and then the gentlemen will talk about what they want to learn in the next 6 months and what their requirements are." With that, he looked at the other 4. All 4 gentlemen then came out to state their identities and the subjects they were going to teach in the future. The books used to accompany the reading in the palace have been placed on their desks. A copy of the Book of Rites was taught by Mr. Zhang Chongzhang, the chief editor of the National History Museum. A copy of the Book of Songs was taught by Mr. Zhao Yanchang Zhao, a lecturer of the Hanlin Academy. A copy of the 18 Posts was calligraphy, which was taught by Mr. Wang Zhuang, a bachelor of the Hanlin Academy, and it is said that he also taught painting, and a copy of the accounting of the 10 classics was an arithmetic, which was taught by Mr. Sun Shisun, a doctor of accounting who came today. 4 gentlemen, 4 books. Nothing seems wrong. But when Mr. Sun, who lectured on arithmetic, finished speaking, everyone found that something was not quite right. Everyone did have books to be used in advance on their bookcase, but there were only 4 books in total, and they were all taught by 4 gentlemen. That. What about Xie Wei? Zhang Xuning was still wondering what kind of medicine Xie Wei was selling in the gourd, and Shen Zai, who was sitting in front of her, opened her mouth curiously, but Mr. Xie, these are only 4 books and 4 courses, doesn't it mean that you have to teach us one in addition to teaching the piano? Xie Wei said, I teach when? Shen Zai wondered, don't you have a book? Xie Wei raised his eyes and glanced outside the hall, and said, someone has gone to get it, and it should be brought in a while. Bring? There are no books in the palace, shouldn't they have been prepared a long time ago, why did they ask someone to bring them now? Everyone was a little weird. But Xie Wei didn't explain much, and after speaking, he sat aside, only to listen to Zhang Chong, the chief editor of the National History Museum who taught the Book of Rites, stand in the hall to quote scriptures and classics, take history as a mirror, and talk to everyone about the importance of learning. Zhang Chong is already in the age of ear shun, with grey sideburns, and he is the one who sat in the hall a few days ago and said that his daughter's family only needs to know too much about reading the female ring, although he knows thousands of years, but standing in the hall and talking is not interesting at all, rigid and boring. The crowd was dizzy. Although Zhang Xuning warned herself in her heart that Xie Wei was still beside her, she really couldn't control her wandering in the world, and her 2 eyes couldn't stop fighting with her eyelids. I was so close to stumbling on the bookcase that I was a little more sober, but when I raised my eyes, I saw Xie Wei sitting there, holding a cup of tea in his hand, staring at her steadily. At this moment, she almost fell to the ground in fright. Some of the drowsiness flew to the country of Java. Zhang Xuning was completely sober, and Xie Wei's sentence "Don't make me angry again" suddenly appeared in her mind, so she quietly pressed her wildly beating eyelids, and cheered up to listen carefully to the lecture of the old monk Zhang Chong above. After staying up for half an hour, Zhang Kongke said, because the old man studied history, the first lesson of the lecture read by Her Royal Highness the eldest princess and your companions today was only taught by the old man, in order to start the case and let you know how important the word learning is. As the saying goes, there is a golden house in the book, and it is an inch of time and an inch of gold. There are not many opportunities to listen to the world's Confucianism gather to give lectures, and you should cherish it. I hope to guard against arrogance and rashness in the future, and the ugly words will be said first. If you bring your arrogant temperament when you were a girl in the house, the old man will never tolerate it. Zhang Xuning sighed in her heart, it's finally over. In her last life, she didn't like to sit here and listen to lectures, and she really can't just blame her for not being motivated and not good at learning, but these old pedants are holding a full shelf, and they don't speak human words when they talk about learning, and they don't care if they understand or are willing to listen, which makes people very impatient. If Xie Wei hadn't been sitting here today, she would have lifted the table and left. And what's even more terrifying is, it's only half an hour now, but the next purgatory-like days will last for half a year. Zhang Xuning was really desperate. Xiao Shu and Chen Shiyi, who were sitting in front, also frowned slightly. Shen Zai in the middle quietly covered her lips with her hand after Zhang Zhong finished speaking, and yawned a lot. However, a few gentlemen did not change their faces, or sat quietly and pondered, or closed their eyes to recuperate, and they didn't feel that there was anything wrong with Zhang Chong's words. Only Xie Wei looked at the 9 sleepy female students in the hall. But before he could say anything, hurried footsteps could be heard outside the hall. A little eunuch hurriedly ran in from outside, and in this cold day, there was a thin sweat on his forehead, and he held a stack of books in his arms, and said to Xie Wei, "Lord Xie, all the books you want have been paid, and they have been bound according to what you said before, and all 10 volumes are here." The rest of the gentlemen looked at him. Shen Zai, who was sitting in the hall, and many companions also looked at him. Xie Wei picked up a book from the stack of books and turned a few pages, as if to confirm that the printing and binding were correct, and then waved his hand and asked the palace people to send these books down and distribute them to everyone. One person has a copy in his hand. The most common blue book cover, with not a single word on it, is a little thicker than other books. Zhang Xuning vaguely remembered that Xie Wei seemed to have sent such a book in her previous life, but she had slipped out as early as when Zhang Chong was drowsy when she was drowsy, and she didn't listen to it seriously later, and she didn't even open the book much. So at this moment, I was a little curious. What is in a book that Xie Wei prepared for lecturing? She took the book in her hand and opened it. However, when I looked closely at the contents of the book, my eyes widened in surprise. Wuyi, Zhang Bok, Duan Yuan, Go Jian destroys Wu, Su Qin speaks of Qin with Lian Heng, on staying in the Ho, on the Six Kingdoms, Gong loses, fish I want, get away, seeking attack, Bnkccai Huan Gong, on passing Qin, sword pavilion Ming, 10 gradually unstoppable, Chang'an snow moon gaze. It turned out to be everything. Some are from Shangshu and Zhouchuan, some are from Chinese and Warring States policy, some are from Mozi and Mencius, from pre-Qin to the two Han dynasties to Wei and Jin, from political theory to travelogues, all of them are to grab Jinghua, select their names, and compile them all into one book. Is this what Xie Wei wants to teach? Zhang Xuning suddenly felt a little bitter. No wonder she can't fight Xiaoshu. I want to thank Wei for his strategic planning and brilliant wisdom, and when I read this book, I know that he is not fooling in lecturing. If he can calm down and learn a few points, even if it is a skin, I am afraid that he will benefit a lot. In the previous life, Xiaoshu listened carefully, and she. For Zhang Xuning, who came back from rebirth and read a lot of books in the previous life, the content of this book can be regarded as shocking, and for other young ladies who have just come out of the boudoir, it is naturally even more shocking. Even Shen Zai stared at her when she saw it, her eyes were round, and she couldn't react for a long time. Chen Shiyi's family education is very strict, although she also reads and writes, but she knows that some books and articles should not be read by her daughter's family, and her family never allows her to read them. At this moment, when I flipped through the content of the book, I couldn't help frowning slightly. She really couldn't help but ask, is Mr. Xie going to teach this? Xie Wei didn't look up, and replied, not bad. Chen Shiyi's fingers gradually pinched the pages of the book, and she actually got up, bowed to Xie Wei, and said word by word, the world is distinct, yin and yang are orderly. Men stand on the outside, women on the inside, there is a clear distinction, and there should be no change. My father once said that political theory is what only men should learn, and if the daughter's family learns from the world, the way to apply it is to be out of order, upside down, and contrary to the principles of heaven. Mr. Shiyi Benjing is a world-class scholar, but now he has compiled such a book to teach me to wait for my daughter's family. Please forgive Shiyi for taking the liberty, sir. Will it be inappropriate to be polite? Xie Weiban was still flipping through the printing of the volume in his hand, and when he heard the words, his finger was on the sentence at the end of on the passage of Qin, benevolence and righteousness are not applied and the offensive and defensive forces are different, and he stood still. Only then did he look up at Chen Shiyi. Only smiled slightly, if you don't want to learn, you can go. Everyone was almost scared to death. What is the difference between this sentence and love to learn, don't learn to roll? However, when Zhang Xuning heard it, she was stunned at first, and then she seemed to see light in the dark, and Xie Wei's sentence kept echoing in her head, if you don't want to learn, you can go. Can you go? She was so excited that she shook her hand and dropped the book to the ground. Smack. At this time, the entire Fengchen hall was quiet, so that this small sound was particularly harsh. Xie Wei's gaze turned around, and when he saw that it was Zhang Suining, his eyes deepened a little, and he only asked, "Second Miss Zhang has an opinion." Zhang Suining was frightened and did not possess her body. The idea of "don't learn and I'll go" that came up just now immediately shrank back, and she shook her head without hesitation to show her loyalty. Mr. Xie chose the best and compiled this book with good intentions. I waited for Her Royal Highness the eldest princess to study, and Her Royal Highness gave birth to a phoenix girl, which is not comparable to ordinary boudoir women. To say that it is not in harmony with etiquette is really to treat others with oneself, which is extremely ridiculous. Xie Wei's eyebrows moved slightly, and he looked at her with a smile on his lips. Chen Shiyi's cold gaze in front of her almost immediately turned around and nailed to her. Zhang Suining's back was cold, and only then did she react. Finished. It's too scary to blame Xie Wei. She didn't pay attention, and in addition to her dog legs, she even said what was in her heart. What happened later, she had no memory at all, although the person seemed to sit there calmly, but she scolded herself in her heart, and only roughly knew that Chen Shiyi finally sat down and didn't say anything. After all, the opportunity to read with you is not easy to come by. Xie Wei's attitude was surprisingly not so kind. Even if she was dissatisfied, she had to weigh it. But after the gentleman explained to Wen Shu and tomorrow's piano learning at the third quarter of Chenzheng, when they were let go of school, Chen Shiyi was the first to leave Fengchen Palace. Xiao Shu and the others were inevitably worried about her, so they all went out. Zhang Suining was somewhat embarrassed and had to fall behind, but as soon as she looked up, she saw Xie Wei walking down from the hall, and when she passed by her, she stopped slightly. Her scalp was numb, and she had to say, "Mr. Xie." When Xie Wei was standing, he was much taller than her. At this moment, he stared at her with lowered eyes, an inexplicable smile opened on his thin lips. Holding the book in one hand and behind him with the other, he said to her leisurely, "Today is quite good." Chapter 47, Loading Clear. Good sense. When Zhang Suining heard these two words, the corners of her eyes twitched. Why did Xie Wei say that she was very spineless? She wanted to stand up and refute it, but when she was about to open her mouth, she thought carefully about her words and deeds today, and she really didn't have the cheekiness to say that she had backbone. After all, if you can get along well, who wants to provoke Xie Wei? I breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the other party didn't seem to have any intention of saying anything more to her, and when the words fell, people had already passed by her and went straight out of the hall. Zhang Suining was in the hall, looking at his back. At this point, the fog has almost dispersed. The bright sky shines from a high place, and it is more and more set off with Xie Wei's high posture, as if an immortal is coming to the world. Where are the bloody and yin owls she saw in her last life? And why did she think that Xie Wei seemed to be in a good mood when he said that to her just now? But when he said to Chen Shiyi, "If you don't want to learn, you can go," he was still in a bad mood, and he didn't know what happened. Otherwise, Xie Juan, who handled things properly and didn't leak, would not have said such things. When she thought of this, Zhang Suining's whole person was not good. Don't tell her that it was her dog's legs that flattered Xie Wei. If it was so easy, how failed she was in her previous life, who had failed by all means. "Ning Ning, aren't you leaving?" Suddenly there was a call from outside the hall. Zhang Suining came back to her senses and turned her head to look, and saw Shen Zai, who was standing outside the palace gate and was looking at her, thinking that they had gone out to comfort Chen Shiyi first, but seeing that she hadn't followed, she turned back to look for herself. "I was a little moved in my heart," She replied, "Here it is." Shen Zai waited for her to come out, then lowered her voice and said to her, "Shiyi's family is strictly controlled, and Master Chen is also the same, so that's why it's like this. You are too, stupid or not, even if you really think so in your heart, you can't say it in front of everyone." Zhang Xuning didn't expect that she would say it. She couldn't explain, so she could only admit it, "It's me who is too reckless, I must pay attention next time." Shen Zai heard that her voice was a little dull, she chuckled in her heart, and hurriedly relieved, "Hey, don't think too much, Shiyi is actually very good, and she never gets angry easily. Even for my sake, I won't bother with you." Zhang Xuning said in her heart that it may not be. But it was not easy to say this to Shen Zai, so she only accepted her kindness with a smile and said, "It's enough to have His Highness's concern, and I don't care about the others." When Shen Zai heard her words, she raised her eyes and met her gentle gaze, with a shallow smile on her petal-like lips, and for some reason, she felt that her face was warm and heartbeat, and she didn't dare to look directly at this delicate face for a while. She was extremely frightened. "Ning Ning, what are you talking about?" After saying that, he was inexplicably embarrassed, stomped his feet, and dropped the sentence, "I'll go back to the palace first," then lifted the corner of his skirt and fled. Zhang Xuning. No, she just wanted to hug her thighs. What did Shen Zai misunderstand? Don't panic. Girlfriends.
星号
Although Chen Shiyi is not an arrogant person, she has never been so angry today. Xie Wei, the gentleman who lectured, wanted to teach their daughter's family something that should never be learned. After all, he was a gentleman, and he had 3 outlines and 5 constants, and as a student, he should respect his teacher, and she shouldn't say anything more. But what kind of thing is a Zhang Xuning? How dare you say that she measures others by herself, which is extremely ridiculous. All the way out of Fengchen Palace, Chen Shi didn't want to see Zhang Xuning more for a moment, she was only afraid of polluting her eyes. Instead, everyone else came up to comfort her. The group returned to Yang's Hizai to persuade her, and said, "Who in the capital doesn't know that Zhang Er is born with a pampered temper, and he can't be on the stage, so it's not unusual to say this kind of thing. Sister Chen is different from her from the inside out, so why bother with her, she is angry and angry. Of course, some people are true persuasion, and some are false persuasions." Yu was afraid that the world would not be chaotic, and she still remembered that she was slapped in the face in the palace before, and said sourly, "Yes, anyone with a discerning eye can see that Her Royal Highness the eldest princess has a crooked heart and is biased towards her." I waited for Baba to send some thoughts, but His Royal Highness turned his head and held her in front of Zhang Xuning for her to choose. I think that if she does something out of the ordinary, His Royal Highness will also protect her. Sister Chen's family background is illustrious, although I don't know how much higher than her, but this is in the palace, I'm afraid it's better not to go against her. Xiao Shu glanced at her. Yao Rongrong sighed enviously, second Miss Zhang can be liked by so many people, she is very capable. Chen Shiyi's face became more and more gloomy. Yu sneered and retorted, "Is that also called having the ability? I heard that she is not good at learning literature, and her conduct is not good. It was when I entered the palace this time to choose a companion to read, everyone saw it with their own eyes. If it weren't for the care of Her Royal Highness the eldest princess, why could she sit in the Fengchen Hall with us?" Yao Shi listened and didn't speak. Chen Shi suddenly looked at her and said, "When Ashi went this morning, it seemed that he was walking with her." Because of the matter of Zhang Shad in front of her, Yao Shi actually felt that Zhang Xuning was not as unbearable as others said, and it was Yu who was tossed by her, not herself, except for being scared at the time, she didn't feel much anymore. She did have plans to get closer to Zhang Suning. After all, I was curious about her and Zhang Shat. But as soon as she saw everyone's attitude and knew that everyone didn't like Zhang Suning, she dispelled this idea and said, I just have something to ask her. Chen Shiyi said, I thought you were going to befriend her. Yao Shi smiled, she is also worthy. Yu immediately echoed, yes, where is she worthy of being friends with Sister De Yao? First of all, the door is 108,000 miles away, and she is given face. Fang Miao sat on the side and listened for a long time, disappreciating it in her heart, and when she arrived here, her eyes rolled and she said, isn't it, that is, Yan Shizi held her in the palm of his hand and felt like a sharp heart, which made everyone afraid of her. The others hadn't heard it wrong. Yu still thought like Fang Miao and herself, and became energetic. I don't know what happened to Yan Shizi, I know that Zhang Suning was sent outside to be poor and raised, she was poor and sour, she looks even more kitsch, and she doesn't have the dignified temperament of everyone's ladies, she is not serious at first glance, where is it a beauty? Fang Miao's face was deeply appreciative, and he nodded again, isn't it, it's just that the eyebrows are a little thinner, the eyes are a little bigger, the nose is a little smaller, the lips are a little better, and the skin is a little whiter than others. It's not good looking, it's not good looking. Yu said, that's right, that is, the eyebrows are thinner and the eyes are bigger. After saying 2 words, I finally realized that something was wrong. Yu turned her head to look at Fang Miao and questioned, are you scolding her or praising her? Everyone's eyes fell on Fang Miao. Fang Miao was taken aback, of course it's scolding her, isn't this scolding with you? Yu's chest was so tight that she almost couldn't breathe. Chen Shi frowned slightly, and asked quite politely, which side is Miss Fang Miao? Fang Miao's face was innocent, and he immediately shouted, am I not obvious? Of course it's from your side. She really didn't look like a fake. Ren is Chen Shi didn't see any flaws, and when she thought that what Fang Miao said was also the truth, she couldn't help but feel a little more depressed. At this time, Zhou Baoying next to her had just finished nibbling on a piece of Osmanthus sugar cake, and I didn't know if she had listened to their previous words, so she might have listened to half of them, and actually raised her head and said, Second Sister Zhang? It's really beautiful. I have never seen such a beautiful sister before. The audience was silent, and the whole Yang's his eye was silent for a while. Zhou Baoying also asked strangely, what's wrong, don't you think? Fang Miao held back her laughter and almost didn't suffocate to death. From Chen Shi to Yao Shi to Yu, all of them were like eating a live fly, and their expressions were extremely indescribable. When Zhang Suning came back from pacing outside unhurriedly, what she saw was such a quiet scene, everyone didn't speak, and only when they heard the footsteps turned their heads and looked at her. Fang Miao sat in the corner and quietly gave her a thumbs up. Zhang Suning was simply confused. However, she guessed that she also knew that she had offended a lot of people that day, or even if she didn't offend, others would be jealous and even jealous because of the eldest princess's concern for her. So instead, I calmed down. When she passed by the door, she smiled, talk slowly, I'll go back to the room first. Chen Shi sneered, if I were the second girl Zhang and said such spineless words in front of everyone, I was afraid that I would be too ashamed to see anyone, but I didn't know that the second girl Zhang was thick-skinned and came back so calmly. Spineless? Zhang Suning said in her heart, what are you Chen Shi and Xie Wei, between offending you and offending Xie Wei, I naturally choose the former, and I am not a fool. And she really didn't like Chen Shi's words. In the previous life, Yu Fangyan and a woman could live freely, but the reason for this is that the living environment is different from that of the Great Qian, why can't the daughter's family learn things? Why is it that the man uses his power to scheming is brilliant and strategizing, and his daughter's family power and strategy has become a reversal of yin and yang, and it is incompatible with etiquette? It's all bullshit. She raised her eyes slightly, her sharpened chin had beautiful lines against the background of the skylight, but there was a kind of contempt in her posture that did not put people in her eyes, and she only sneered and said, "If you have backbone, don't take Mr. Xie's class, and you don't tie your feet, pretend to be tall." Chen Shi suddenly got up, "You dash." After Jiang Xuning finished scolding her, she walked away. She didn't bother to look at her, only a muttering that seemed to be out of nowhere came into everyone's ears after she left. The eldest princess didn't speak. "Which onion are you?" Everyone quietly looked at Chen Shi. A tea party that criticized Jiang Xuning behind his back, unconsciously died down, and I don't know who said, "In the afternoon, I will go with Her Royal Highness the eldest princess to greet the Queen and the Queen Mother, and go back to the room to rest first," and the people gradually dispersed. Only Chen Shi's face was blue and red, as if she had been slapped by someone, standing there, trembling all over. Chapter 48, Zhang Bao. From the beginning of being elected to the palace, the road was not right. She didn't even present her name, but she was elected to the palace, which undoubtedly made people suspect that there was someone behind her, and she was in the limelight and hated. When she entered the palace, she thought that she could hide her clumsiness in the selection and lose the election, but she couldn't stand too many people who wanted her to enter the palace, but because of this, people felt that they were not worthy of virtue and became a thorn in the side of people. Now that she has really entered the palace, others have prejudices against her, and it is impossible for her to mingle with others. And Chen Shi tore her face. "In fact, it's really nothing. It's just pulling the undercurrent under the countertop onto the countertop." After returning to her room and thinking about it, Jiang Xuning clearly realized the dilemma she was facing at the moment. She still had to stay in the palace for half a year, although the eldest princess of Liang liked her, but the palace was so big, who knew what would happen in the future? You must know that under the walls of this palace, it is the easiest thing to harm someone. Contradictions have already occurred. Of course, she has no intention of harming others, but who knows if others are harming her? In this life, although she didn't plan to get involved in the battle of the court, she only waited for half a year to pass before packing her bags and flying away. But there is also a premise for going away and flying high, that is, I will at least live when the time comes. Closing the door, throwing herself on the couch and lying down, her eyes calmly watching the light and shadow projected from the window to the top of the embroidered tent, Jiang Xuning felt that she had to do something. First of all, does she have any advantages over these people who don't like her very well? Family? She can only be considered average, not up or down. Your favorite? Of course, she has Shen Zai, but Shen Zai is not the only one who can speak in the palace. Ingenuity? She knows how to read words and looks, and acts much more appropriately than in the previous life, but compared with people with great wisdom, she can only be regarded as quick and clever, and she is not too far beyond others. In all, there is only one real and greatest strength in her, being born again, prophet. She knows a lot of things that others don't know, and she knows a lot of things that haven't happened yet, and even knows a lot of people she hasn't met yet. This means that she has more opportunities than others. To seek advantages and avoid disadvantages, to recognize people, to seize the opportunity. So, judging from what she knew in her previous life, what is there in the palace now? Is there anyone who can be used for herself? Jiang Xuning folded his fingers and calculated, the future Tenhu Lang Waliang should still be studying in Yangzhou now. Xiao Dingfei, the fake young master of the Dengzi disciple, now I don't know where the horn is planning the time to appear. Sun Shanggong is a credible good person, but where did she come from at this time in the previous life? Tucked down? Or which unfavored concubine is in the womb? After all the calculations, she was a little dazed, and for a while she couldn't remember who could use it for herself during this period. People's memories are already chaotic, and she may not remember all the details of her previous life when she is reborn. She always feels that she has missed something important, and in the end she has no clue, and she is a little dizzy. It was afternoon. Jiang Xuning simply closed her eyes and fell asleep. At the beginning of the day, there was a waiting palace person outside who knocked on the door and called her, "Second Miss Jiang, it's time to go to the palace of the Queen Mother and the Queen Mother to say goodbye." She woke up from her sleep and sat up. Asterisk. In the previous dynasty, the emperor was in charge. The harem is naturally the queen's decision. According to the rules, the companions should go to the Queen Mother and the Queen to ask for peace on the first day they enter the palace, but the last time they entered the palace, the matter was too tight, and no one forced it. This time they entered the palace yesterday afternoon, and they had to go to Fengchen Hall the next morning, so the matter of asking for peace was postponed to this afternoon. After Jiang Xuning freshened up in her room, when she arrived in the hall, the others almost came out one after another, but because of the unkind words between her and Chen Shi before, everyone looked at her a little strangely, and no one came up to take the initiative to talk to her. Only Fang Miao squeezed her eyebrows at her when no one was looking. Yu pulled Yao Shi to talk to others, and did not give others a chance to talk to Jiang Xuning, obviously to deliberately exclude her. Chen Shi came out after dressing up, and she was even more cold to her, although she didn't speak, but the tense posture was very obvious. Even the palace people who came to lead them to ask for peace felt that the atmosphere was wrong, and they didn't dare to look up at them, and spoke softly. The Queen Mother has been infected with the wind cold for the past 2 days, and the Queen Mother is serving in Sinaing Palace at this moment, so it is good to go directly to Sinaing Palace to ask for peace, and it also happens to save you from reading and walking twice. Please come with the slaves. The location of Yang's Hizai is closer to the outer court, but Sinaing Palace is deep in the inner palace, and it is almost necessary to pass through most of the harem when you walk over, and behind the high palace wall is the east and west 6th palace. Cunning Palace is behind the Qianqing Palace, and it is also on the central axis of the entire palace. Among the 8 companions, Fang Miao, Yu, and Yao Rongrong had basically never entered the palace before, and they didn't dare to walk around the last time they came, so they were still not familiar with the palace. Jiang Xuning had never entered the palace on the surface, but she couldn't stand her from being reborn, although this huge palace was complicated, but for her, she wouldn't go the wrong way with her eyes closed, so she wasn't curious. Yu lowered her voice and asked Yao Shi, who happened to be walking beside her curiously, "Sister Yao Shi, is the Cunning Palace in front?" Yao Shi glanced in the direction she was pointing and said, "Exactly, the queens of this dynasty all lived in Cunning Palace. The current queen is from the Zhang family in Henan, and she is the first match of the saint when he was in the hidden mansion. However, on weekdays, they live in a simple place, and in the past, we entered the palace to invite her to be exempted, and only asked us to go to the Queen Mother's side, saying that the Queen Mother was more lively." Yu nodded, "I see." Jiang Xuning walked at the back. Her steps were not fast or slow, but when she heard Yao Shi's words, she raised her eyebrows, and sneered in her heart. Love to be hilarious. The old witch wished that the whole palace was revolving around her. The first emperor died too early, and she didn't have enough addiction to being a queen, so she had to move out of Cunning Palace and go to the clean and remote Sinaing Palace. Where could she be willing? The old witch was born in the Xiao family. She was originally the sister of Xiao Yuan, the Duke of Dingguo, that is, Xiao Shu's aunt, Her mother's family is strong, and she has always been able to speak in the harem, even if the first emperor died and she became the queen mother, she has never relaxed her control over the harem. After the death of Shen Lang in the previous life, he was succeeded by the emperor's younger brother Shenju. Zhang Xuning, as the princess of Linzi, should be sealed, but the old witch actually stirred up and said, Zhang Shide is not worthy, misbehaved, and has no motherly demeanor, the emperor should vacate the throne and seal her to the fourth concubine. When she heard the news, she almost died. Fortunately, the old ministers of the former dynasty are sensible. Where in the world is there a reason why a prince who ascends the throne does not appoint himself as a queen with his wife? If he does this, will he not make future generations laugh at him? So they all went to the book to advise. And she was a white lotus in her last life, she didn't make any mistakes, and she was pitiful. The more she was bullied, the more she could arouse people's desire to protect. Shenju was a man anyway, how could she be bullied like this? So in the end, it was still for her to get to the back seat. However, after the seal, she and Empress Dowager Xiao made a feud. The royal family also has a short family. Empress Dowager Xiao, who is a mother-in-law, picks her nose and eyes at her, and often uses filial piety to pressure her, making her very unhappy. It wasn't until Xiao Shu entered the palace later, sealed the concubine, and the pomp and circumstance of Qingli was bigger than her, that Zhang Xuning came back to her senses. The old witch who dared to love was to support the younger generations of her mother's family and let her niece Xiao Shu be the queen. The harem then became a shura field. Zhang Xuning's foundation is already thin. In order not to be by this aunt and nephew, she can only refuse to come, but whoever is willing to be loyal, she promises benefits, and with her ability to observe words and emotions to please people, she has gathered a group of forces, which is barely stable. However, such a discriminate and treacherous use of people will naturally lead to mud and sand. In the eyes of outsiders and kingly courtiers, she is undoubtedly a party and a private business, like a poisoned tumor in the court, and even accused of interfering in the harem. Later, when she was placed under house arrest by Xie Wei, Yan Lin, and other rebels, the former ministers forced her to bury Shenju like snowflakes, so in the end, she ended up miserable, and she was a little self-defeating. Therefore, it can be said that Zhang Xuning's hatred for Empress Dowager Xiao in the previous life was far greater than his hatred for Xiao Shu. Now that I have come back from rebirth, I have to say hello to this old witch. Zhang Xuning felt that her back molars were itching when she thought about it, and she had to bite tightly to restrain the urge to scold. Yao Shi, who was walking in front, didn't know that there was someone hiding a deep hatred behind her, so she only led the conversation to Xiao Shu's body, and said with a smile, I was also fortunate to go to the palace with my father and mother during the Yuan festival 2 years ago, and I asked the Queen Mother and her old man to say goodbye, and I was a little nervous to see her again this time. Sister Ashu will have to help me then, you are the Queen Mother's favorite niece, if there is anything inconsiderate about our etiquette for a while, and it makes her old man unhappy, it is up to you to speak to us. The smile on Xiao Shu's lips was a little lighter, she glanced at Yao Shi, and only said, now we are just the companions of Her Royal Highness the eldest princess, and the Queen Mother also liked Sister Ashi in the past, so there is nothing to worry about. Zhang Xuning knew as soon as she heard that Xiao Shu knew very well the truth of making a big move. Although she is the daughter of the Queen Mother's own nephew, she is still a cousin with Shen Zai, but she is not high profile, and she has never mentioned her relationship with the Queen Mother after being in the palace for so long, so she must not want to become the target of too much attention from others. But how can this kind of thing be low-key? Sure enough, as soon as Yao Shi's words came out and Xiao Shu's words came out, the expressions on everyone's faces changed slightly. As he spoke, he was getting closer and closer to Cunning Palace in a short time, but at the same time, several strange voices gradually entered everyone's ears and became clear. Smack, smack. It's clear and crisp. Everyone else raised their eyes with some curiosity and looked at the source of the voice. Zhang Xuning, who had been in the court for several years in the previous life, immediately heard that this was the sound of slapping people's faces, and it felt extremely heavy and very solid. Just turned a palace wall, and Chen Shiyi's footsteps in front of her suddenly stopped. Yao Rongrong, who saw the scene in front of her, exclaimed in a low voice, "Ah!" When he screamed, he realized that something was wrong and quickly covered his lips. Next to the palace gate of Cunning Palace, there was a kneeling eunuch. The hat on his head had fallen crookedly to the ground, and only a simple wooden hairpin was inserted. I didn't spare any energy. He actually hit himself to death. The original white face had already had intertwined finger marks, and even the corners of the mouth were broken, oozing a few wisps of blood. Have you seen such a scene from the companions who have just entered the palace? At this time, they did not dare to continue to move forward. All of them stopped. Zhang Xuning's gaze crossed the people in front of him and fell on the little eunuch, and he could only see a silhouette. But at this moment, she felt a little familiar, and something flashed in her mind, and at the end, a resolute and heroic face accompanied by splashed blood finally filled her entire mind. Zhang Bao. Later, Zhang Bao, the eunuch who served beside Shen Ju, was loyal to Shen Ju in his last life, although he was a rootless person, but his temperament was extremely strong. When Shen Ju died of poisoning for Yan Lin and Xie Wei, he pointed at the nose of the two and scolded them for rebelling against the party, and after laughing 3 times, he refused to be with them, and directly drew his sword to kill himself, and was martyred for Shen Ju. At that time, some people ridiculed that the Manchu dynasty had no male children, but a rootless eunuch was the most kind. Zhang Xuning finally remembered what she had missed when she was thinking about who could be used for herself. Missed Zhang Bao. If she remembers correctly, Zhang Bao is now a little eunuch serving in Cunning Palace on the surface, but in fact, he has been favored by the current Palm Seal eunuch Wang Xinyi and wants to accept him as an apprentice. The reason why he followed Shen Ju was precisely because one year when he knelt outside Cunning Palace and was punished, he was seen by Shen Ju who was passing by, interceded for him, and asked the queen to spare him. Since then, he has only been loyal to Shen Ju alone, and he has not betrayed until the mountains and rivers are exhausted. What if it wasn't Shen Ju in this life, but she saved Zhang Bao? But here's the problem. Shen Ju is the king of Linzi, and her words are useful. She is just a companion at the moment. How can she save her? Chapter 49, Woe. Looking for Yan Lin? The accident in the Yanji Marquis mansion is imminent, and he has already learned the news from Zhou Yinzi. It is too late to prepare secretly, and he doesn't know where it is now, not to mention whether it is appropriate for him to enter the palace now. It will take a while for him to come. God knows if Shen Ju has already entered the palace to save Zhang Bao at that time. So what's the matter with her? But at the moment, she has no status, she has never even seen the queen's face, and she doesn't know a few people in the palace now, and she can't even use more roundabout means to save people. Zhang Xuning stood behind everyone, already secretly feeling that his head was big. The people who stopped in front of them were also a little timid. The little palace maid who led the way obviously didn't expect to encounter such a situation. The road in front of you is the closest way to Sinning Palace. Those of them who have been serving in the palace for a long time have seen this kind of situation where palace maids and eunuchs are punished, and they generally walk over without looking at them, but with this large group of companions, everyone looks a little scared. Xiao Shu frowned, and didn't want to be unlucky as soon as she entered the palace, so she only said to the palace maid, everyone has just entered the palace, and they don't dare to watch this kind of scene, let's go another way. The palace maid breathed a sigh of relief, Miss Xiao is right. She retreated, waved her hand, and redirected everyone to the palace in another direction, please accompany you to read this way. Zhang Xuning had no expression on her face, but she was a little anxious in her heart, but she couldn't think of a way for a while. Yes, although he felt that the opportunity could not be lost and would not come again, he had to follow in the footsteps of the others and leave through another palace road. As she turned, she glanced back. Zhang Bao was still kneeling in front of Cunning Palace, his back was straight, not at all like the eunuchs in the palace who were used to bowing their heads, but his low-hanging beautiful eyebrows and eyes were a little resolute, and he clearly heard that someone was coming, and the movements in his hands did not stop for half a minute, still gritting his teeth, and slapping him in the face. Asterisk. Because of the detour halfway, so everyone arrived at the gate of the Sinaing Palace later than originally thought. At the palace gate a grandmother who looked at some seniority was waiting outside, and when she saw them, she asked, "Why did you arrive at this time?" Her Royal Highness the eldest princess has already arrived first, and she is talking to the Queen Mother inside. The little palace maid trembled in fright. Zhang Xuning's heart suddenly moved. Xiao Shu glanced at the little palace maid and took the initiative to speak. After passing through Cunning Palace, it is a detour, it is only late, Mama Su is not to blame. Mama Su didn't blame the little palace maid. If you listen to the words of doing things in the palace, you can guess something, there must be a reason for the detour, and it was Xiao Shu who spoke. Of course she would not ask more, and even showed a smile on her originally serious and solemn face, and said, I see, then please come in. The eldest lady too, but I haven't been in the palace for a while, and the Queen Mother heard that you chose to read with you, so she chattered a few times. After all, it is the grandmother who is waiting by the old witch's side, maybe she still watched Xiao Shu grow up, so she is naturally familiar with it and has a kind attitude. Zhang Xuning sneered lightly in her heart when she saw it. Although she arrived here, she still remembered Zhang Bao in her heart, and only thought that the opportunity was right in front of her, but she might miss it because she was going to come to ask the old witch for peace, and she simply wrote down the aunt and nephew on the account of new hatred and old hatred. Although Sinaing Palace is the dormitory of the Queen Mother of the past dynasties, it has always been not too extravagant, but it has changed when it comes to the Queen Mother of this dynasty. Many of the tributes from Fanbang and the state capitals were sent to Sinaing Palace, saying that Shen Lang was filial and that they were all given to Empress Dowager Xiao. It is because today's Sinaing Palace looks very gorgeous. Following Mama Su into the palace gate, Zhang Xuning saw the water lilies and koi fish raised in the carved jar, went up the steps, entered the main hall, carved beams and gold bricks up and down, and the left and right halls were full of gold and jade, and even the ground was covered with good velvet carpets from the Persian kingdom on the sea. After Shen Zai returned to the palace, she changed into a light pink palace dress, and at this moment she came to Sinaing Palace, and was snuggling up to the Empress Dowager Xiao to talk to her. Don't you see, Mr. Xiao is amazing. Empress Zheng sat next to her with some embarrassment. Mama Su stepped forward, the Queen Mother, people are here. When Shen Zai, who had just said it, heard it, she immediately stopped talking and turned her head to look. Led by Xiao Shu, including Zhang Xuning, the 8 companions who were selected to enter the palace did not dare to raise their heads easily after entering the palace, and bowed down after Mama Su's voice landed, the courtiers and others will meet the Queen Mother, the Queen Mother. The etiquette of everyone was strictly taught by Su Shang'ai, and they didn't dare to be sloppy when they first met the 2 most important women in the harem, so they almost couldn't find any mistakes. Generally speaking, you will wake up after the salute. Unexpectedly, the smiling voice from above didn't pay attention to the others at all, but said directly to Xiao Shu below, "Shu'er is here, hurry up, and let my aunt take a look." Everyone was stunned. Xiao Shu sighed in her heart, but she couldn't say anything, so she got up and put on a smile and called, "Auntie." She stepped forward. Empress Dowager Xiao is 45 or 16 years old this year, and has 2 sons and a daughter for the former emperor. The eldest son is the current emperor Shen Lang, the second son is the current Linzi king Shen Ju, and the youngest daughter is Shen Zai, the eldest princess of Liang. The women who are living well in the palace are well maintained. So she doesn't look very old, although there are fine lines at the corners of her eyes. She also has the charm of an experienced woman, and when she smiles at the corners of her mouth, she seems to be able to see her youth, and she only took Xiao Shu's hand and said, "Little without conscience, I didn't know how to come to see my aunt when I entered the palace last time." Xiao Shu said, "The last time I entered the palace, I was to choose a companion for Zai. If I came to see my aunt at that time, I was afraid that I would be criticized and said that my aunt could stay in the palace because of my aunt. Shu is slandered and doesn't care. If others feel that her aunt is favoritism, it is Shu's fault. Now that he has stayed in the palace to study, it is naturally convenient to see his aunt in the future, and he will make amends." Empress Dowager Xiao asked her to sit beside her, looked at her carefully, became more and more satisfied, and said, "I told your father that I wanted to keep you in the palace for a long time, but he said that it was so unruly, that Zai, the girl, didn't even have a playmate of the same age, and she had to find a companion outside the palace to read in, troublesome. Toss and toss, don't you still live in the palace?" And that Yang's his eye lived, and he didn't mourn the comfort of this Sinning palace, it was really. When the rest of the companions who were still kneeling in the hall heard this, they all bowed their heads and did not dare to lift them up. "Zhang Xuning knows the old witch very well. Why don't you know that she is saying that their companions actually don't need to come in except for Xiao Shu, and there is no way to compare with Xiao Shu? It's just that now she is not the queen, and she can't be scared." The aunt and nephew pulled up the family routine as if no one was around. Shen Zai looked at her queen mother, and couldn't help but look at Zhang Xuning, who was still kneeling below. She wanted to speak, but she was familiar with her mother's temperament, and knew that she wanted to read a dismount to these companions, but it was not easy to speak. Kneeling upright is exhausting. Zhang Xuning only maintained that posture for a while, then felt that her knees hurt, and she scolded the old witch 1,000 times in her heart. Fortunately, Empress Zheng is a benevolent heart. Seeing that the girls below are not very old, her body began to shake unsteadily, hesitated, but still smiled, and pretended to say inadvertently, "Miss Xiao is here, I am finally happier to see the Queen Mother. But you're chatting happily, and these little girls are still kneeling down there, looking at them and about to fall." Empress Dowager Xiao, who was talking to Xiao Shu, stopped. Under her eyebrows, she stared at the majesty of being in charge of the harem for many years, and when she heard this, she glanced down, and her eyes fell back to Empress Zheng, and she said with a smile, "You will be a good person." Empress Zheng's face changed suddenly, and she got up to confess. Empress Dowager Xiao waved her hand, laughed, and said downward, "The queen has the most benevolent heart, and she can't see anyone suffering. She has spoken, and you are still kneeling, but it seems that the mourning family is not kind. Get up." Empress Dowager Xia, Queen Mother. Everyone was a little frightened when they heard this, and only after trembling and thanking them did they get up again, and stood down in a proper manner. Zhang Xuning took the opportunity to glance at Empress Zheng. This is also a poor man. After marrying Shen Lang, she didn't be the queen for 2 years, not to mention, when she was the queen, she was pressed by the Empress Dowager Xiao, and she didn't have any majesty. After Shen Lang's death, Shenju succeeded to the throne, and Empress Zheng, the imperial sister-in-law, was named Empress Taizheng and moved to Changning Palace. Shenzai saw Zhang Xuning standing up, a little relieved, and pouted, "Queen Mother, you are always so scary, they all go back to play with me and read together, all of them are not very bold, you scared them out of illness, who will play with me?" Empress Dowager Xiao was helpless. "I just forgot to tell them to get up for a while, how did it become scary?" Shenzai snorted lightly, "I don't know the Queen Mother yet." Empress Dowager Xiao laughed, suddenly remembered something, cast her eyes again, and said, "I remember Su Shanghai said that there is a new companion who likes you very much, is it called Zhang Xuning, right?" Zhang Xuning chuckled in her heart when she heard the first half of the sentence, and sure enough, her name was really called later, although she didn't want to be exposed in front of the old witch, she still had to stand up, looked obedient, and saluted again, "Courtier Zhang Xuning, I have seen the Queen Mother." Empress Dowager Xiao looked at her. Just looking at it, his brows furrowed, and he said, "Yan Yi is too much, frivolous, and not dignified enough." Zhang Xuning has an idea in her heart now. Xie Wei hurriedly rebelled and threw this old witch to feed the dogs. Hung was born to look so good. "Can you eat your rice?" "I just thought so in my heart, but I didn't dare to say it." Lives matter. She also knows the temperament of the Empress Dowager Xiao, and she must not raise the bar with her, otherwise there will be good fruits to eat in the future, so she endured it for a while, lowered her eyebrows and said, "The courtier's daughter was born in a disaster, so her parents sent the courtier's daughter to the grange to be raised poorly, and she only returned to the capital 4 years ago. Seeing the Queen Mother today, I was very frightened and at a loss, and I will strictly restrain myself in the future, and I will not dare to slack off in the slightest for the companionship of Her Royal Highness the eldest princess." Empress Dowager Xiao was stunned for a moment, but she didn't expect her to say this, and she was a little impressed. She looks frivolous, but she speaks very steadily. "It's just that looking at such a glamorous appearance, I always feel uncomfortable." She waved her hand casually and said jokingly, "That's it, stand back. I heard that you are still the person on the tip of the heart of the little prince of the Yanji Marquis mansion, and the old and young of that family can see that the mourning family is not pleasing to the eye. If you are embarrassed, you have to talk about it. The Yan family of the Yanji Haofu and the Xiao family of the Dingguo mansion were married more than 20 years ago, but now they seem to be old and dead, and even have some mutual hatred." Everyone had heard the rumors, but they didn't know why. "I didn't expect to hear it clearly from Empress Dowager Xiao today, and I was a little shocked for a while." Zhang Xuning was in the whirlpool, but she faintly smelled a bit of ominous smell. First, Xiao Shu said in public that Yan Lin gave her the piano, and now it is Empress Dowager Xiao who jokingly talks about the relationship between the Xiao family and the Yan family, as if she no longer takes the Yanji Marquis mansion in her eyes. She stepped back in silence and stood still. At this time, there was a rumor from the palace outside, saying that Gong Lu from the Internal Affairs Office was here. As soon as Empress Dowager Xiao raised her hand, she called someone in and asked, "What's the matter?" That Lu Gong was born with a fat head and big ears, and he was very flattering, and when he came in to salute, his waist almost bent to the ground, and he only held the brocade box in his hand above his head, and said in that sharp voice, "The Queen Mother said that she broke the handle of Jade Ruyi, and the saint heard it today, doesn't this worry about you? Qinghai tribute Jade Ruyi? Wait a minute." Zhang Xunning's eyelids jumped suddenly, and she already screamed in her heart, this incident happened to her. The emperor is still so filial, I'll take a look when things are presented. Empress Dowager Xiao's eyebrows had stretched a little, and she only raised her hand forward. Gong Lu immediately bowed forward, and Baba sent Yu Ruyi to the hands of Empress Dowager Xiao. Jade Ruyi is made of red jade, the whole body is red, only Ruyi's head is a piece of snow white, just carved into an auspicious cloud pattern. It can be regarded as a unique and rare precious. When Empress Dowager Xiao got it in her hands, she liked it very much. It's just that she just said good, and when she turned over this jade ruyi to look at it, her expression suddenly froze, and the original smile instantly froze on her face, and her two eyes stared at the back of the jade ruyi handle, and her face suddenly turned blue. Because there are 2 lines of seal characters engraved on the back. 300 righteous children, why should they die tragically? Emperor Yang has no virtue and dares to be called the son of heaven. Bold. Empress Dowager Xiao was furious. Others didn't know what was going on, she had already smashed this jade ruyi down and smashed it. The broken red jade fell at Zhang Sunning's feet, she didn't dare to move, and her scalp was numb. That's it. Opened the disaster of the Yanji Marquis' mansion. Chapter 50, Seize the Opportunity. Although Empress Dowager Xiao had a loving attitude towards everyone before, everyone was also very afraid of her, but compared with the anger full of frost and cold at the moment, it was a small thing. No one expected that a jade ruyi would be offered, and the good end would be angry. When you don't know what is happening, you are so frightened that you don't dare to say anything. Gong Gong Lu, who came to offer jade ruyi, only felt a chill on his back, and immediately knelt down without thinking about it, shouting, "The Queen Mother is angry, the Queen Mother is angry." Others are in front of the steps. Empress Dowager Xiao kicked over, raised her hand and called left and right, and shouted, "Come on, take down this rebel party." Father-in-law Liu's face suddenly changed greatly. Although he came over to offer the jade ruyi, but he didn't know what kind of mystery was behind the jade ruyi. Hearing the cold drink of the Empress Dowager Xiao, he was already frightened out of the body. 7 spirits left the body, and a head hurriedly hit the ground and cried, "Wronged, slave wronged." The slave was just ordered to offer the jade ruyi, but he didn't know where to anger the Queen Mother, and asked the Queen Mother to forgive. The slave was wronged. Shen Zai and Xiao Shu were sitting next to the Empress Dowager Xiao, and only vaguely glimpsed the handwriting behind the jade ruyi, but they didn't see what it was. Empress Zheng was also taken aback. She knew that although Empress Dowager Xiao's temper had never been good, she had her meanness, but if she reacted like this, something must have happened, and she called Gong Gong Lu a rebel party, so she guessed that the matter was not trivial. Although the jade ruyi was broken, there were several pieces of broken jade that were larger. Empress Zheng didn't interject for the time being, but walked down from the palace, picked up one of the broken jades and looked at it, only to see the word Yitong on it, and her face changed greatly, and she was not much better than Empress Dowager Xiao. The left and right have come up to restrain that Lu Gonggong. Empress Zheng glanced at the girls who were still trembling below, and only forcibly suppressed the shock in her heart, and said to them, "You guys should retreat first." Empress Dowager Xiao's face was pale, and she didn't say anything more this time. Everyone wanted to know that the matter was big, and it was definitely not something that they, the newcomers to the palace, should know, and when they heard Empress Zheng's words, they hurriedly bowed down and retired. Xiao Shu also got up from her seat and said goodbye to the Empress Dowager Xiao. Shen Zai was still sitting there in a daze. When Xiao Shu left, she hurriedly pulled her and took her out of Sinaing Palace together. When Zhang Suning walked out of the gate of Sinaing Palace, she was blown by the wind with a little cold in early winter outside, and she realized that she was in a cold sweat behind her back. This is the Ruyi case that was widely implicated in the previous life. The jade ruyi selected by the Ministry of Internal Affairs to be dedicated to the Empress Dowager Xiao was engraved with a great rebellion, and it pointed directly to the Son of Heaven in this dynasty. As soon as the incident came out, it immediately led to a bloody storm. Many of the people who served in the palace were involved in the 9 clans, and the big families of the previous dynasty were also involved, and it was not a problem to raid the family and destroy the clan. Although the accident in the Yangji Marquis mansion has nothing to do with this case on the surface, the two things are really very close, which makes people have to be suspicious. Thinking of the Yangji Marquis mansion, thinking of Yan Lin, and thinking of the various causes and consequences of the previous life, she suddenly felt like a numb, and shook the palm she had hidden in her sleeve vigorously, and barely calmed down. What should come is always coming. The more times like this, the more you can't mess up, the more you have to do what you should do in the chaos. Shenzai was still a little confused when she was pulled out by Xiao Shu, and asked in a daze, "What's going on?" Xiao Shu lowered her gaze and did not speak. Shenzai raised her eyes and saw Zhang Xuning standing on the edge of everyone, and walked over and said with concern, "Ning Ning, are you okay? Your face is so pale." Zhang Xuning remembered Zhang Bao, who was still kneeling at the gate of Cunning Palace before. Her eyes flickered slightly, and she said in her heart, "There is no other way," so she barely squeezed out a smile, but there was a little fear and panic in her expression, and she said in a low voice, "It's a little scared of me." Shenzai was actually frightened. But she thought that she was the eldest princess, and she was the one who promised to protect Zhang Xuning, so she immediately put on an ordinary small scene in the palace, took her hand and said, it's okay, isn't there still this princess?" Her palm held Zhang Xuning's slender fingers, and she felt that her fingertips were cold. Zhang Xuning only looked at her and didn't speak. But the thick eyelashes trembled gently on a pair of good-looking eyes, like a deer that had fallen from a sharp arrow on the snowfield, and his fingers also grabbed Shenzai's hand. At such a moment, Shenzai could strongly feel that the friend in front of her, who had a bright smile and cherry blossom pink petals on the corner of her eyes, needed her so urgently and relied on her. Originally, when they came out of Sinning Palace, they should have returned to the palace. The Mingfeng Palace where Shenzai lives and Yangzi Zaban are in 2 different directions, so they should be separated at the gate of Sinning Palace, and each should go separately. But now she felt like she couldn't just leave. Shenzai held her hand, curled the corners of her lips, and raised a bright smile as if she was fine, and pulled her to the direction of Yang Zhizai, only saying, "Look at your timidity, this princess will go back with you." After speaking, he said to the others, "Let's go." And they all followed them. Along the way, Shenzai was telling Zhang Xuning some interesting stories in the palace, talking about herself. Sometimes she had to call Xiao Shu and Chen Shi to pick her up. Xiao Shu is okay and has been quiet. Chen Shi has already made an enmity with Zhang Xuning, but when the eldest princess of Liang speaks, she can't refuse, so she can only tell Zhang Xuning jokes with a stiff face. Zhang Xuning only felt that if it weren't for today's important matter, she would have to laugh out loud. However, at this time, even he has to spit on himself. In the previous life, it was just a matter of coaxing a stinky man, but I didn't start with Xiangxiang's soft daughter's family. Unexpectedly, I will live a lifetime, and I am becoming more and more bottomless, and I am getting more and more down. Shenzai was still unaware of this. The group walked in the direction of Yang Zhizai. When they came, they walked in the direction of Cunning Palace, but when they went back, everyone didn't pay attention, and second, Shenzai and Zhang Xuning walked in front, so they naturally took the nearest road that would pass next to Cunning Palace. As early as when he could see the palace wall of Cunning Palace from afar, Zhang Xuning's heart had already been raised, and he secretly prayed that he would catch up. When I turned the corner of the palace wall, my heart almost jumped to my throat. There was silence on the palace road ahead. The applause that I had heard before was gone. At this moment, Jiang Xuning almost thought that she had missed the opportunity. Fortunately, when she turned to the palace road the next moment, she saw the figure kneeling at the palace gate. Zhang Bao is still there. It's just that before she could breathe a sigh of relief for this, she smiled a little, and as soon as she raised her eyes, she saw another figure not far in front of the palace gate. The python robe is gorgeous, and the waist is tied with a jade belt. With a long body and an elegant face, who is Shenju, not the king of Linzi? At this moment, he was looking at Zhang Bao, who was kneeling for a long time, and he raised his head to say something to the palace people standing at the palace gate. Jiang Xuning's eyelids jumped, but she didn't dare to let Shenju open her mouth to save Zhang Bao like this. She was in a hurry. She deliberately tripped her left foot and stepped on the corner of her skirt with her right foot, and her body suddenly lost her balance while walking, and she let out a low exclamation, and she was already kneeling on the ground. She didn't react much. Shen Zai, who was walking next to her and was still telling her jokes, panicked, and shouted, "Ning Ning!" Shenju, who was about to ask why this little eunuch was punished at the palace gate in front, heard the voice, immediately turned his head to look at the voice, and saw the companion over there at a glance, and quickly recognized Jiang Xuning who had fallen. Being interrupted by this, normal people will forget what they were supposed to do. Shenju is the same. He hurriedly walked towards them, but because there were other companions present, it was difficult to get too close, so he only said gently, "Although the long road in this palace is very old, it has only been repaired a year ago. Why is second Miss Zhang so careless?" The last time the companions entered the palace, they also met Shenju by chance, knew his identity, and bowed down when they saw him approaching. "I have seen His Royal Highness the King of Linzi." Jiang Xuning's heart settled when she saw him coming over. Thinking that they were close relatives and alien husband and wife in their last life, and her death could barely be regarded as a martyrdom for Shenju, what happened to robbing him of an opportunity in this life? Just think of it as the money and life compensation that Shenji gave him. Anyway, he is the king of Linzi, and there will be no shortage of Zhang Bao when he becomes the emperor in the future. But she's lacking it. Thinking like this, Jiang Xuning somewhat eliminated the guilt of robbing people's opportunities, and quickly said, "Back to your highness, I just went to visit the Queen Mother. Feng Wei is deep, and in a trance, I stumbled over myself and made you laugh." Xiao Shu looked at her quietly. Shen Zai personally helped her up, and when she heard her words, she also pouted to Shenju, "Brother Wang, you weren't there just now, the Queen Mother is scary." Although Shenju's temperament is humble and gentle, he was born in the court, and he knew that something should have happened to Sinaing Palace just by listening to their words, so he frowned slightly and asked, "What's wrong?" Shen Zai said, "It's just a jade ruyi, I don't know how to say it." She wanted to straighten it out, but she didn't know where to start, and it was a mess. Shenju was confused. In the end, Xiao Xian said concisely, "Gong Gong Lu of the Internal Affairs Office sent a jade ruyi from Qinghai to pay tribute on the order of the saint, but there seems to be some big rebellious words engraved behind that ruyi, which angered my aunt, and now the queen is also in Sinaing Palace and is dealing with this matter." Shenju couldn't help but raise his eyes and glance at her. Shenzai I heard Xiao Shu say it so concisely, so she nodded hurriedly and said, "Yes, that's it, Brother Wang, go and take a look." Shenju was originally going to greet the Empress Dowager Xiao, but after a little hesitation, he said, "I'll take a look." When he said this, the matter of the little eunuch had long been forgotten. He walked in the direction of Sinaing Palace, but when he passed by the companions, he caught a glimpse of Jiang Xuning, who had just fallen and stood up, was lowering his head and touching his knees, so he couldn't help laughing, and quipped, you can also fall when you walk on flat ground. Zhang girl has to look at the road well, otherwise she owes the king that meal of reparation wine and will be broken before you are invited, but I don't know who is distressed when I turn around. Zhang Xuning was stunned, and didn't react for a while what the atonement wine was, until Shen Ju turned around and left. She remembered that she had a misunderstanding when she just came back from rebirth, and after giving Shen Ju a slap, she had said that she would ask for wine to make amends another day. Words are naturally polite words. But unexpectedly, Shen Ju still remembered. When the companions saw that Shen Ju came over and only took care of Zhang Xuning, their eyes were already a little strange. When I heard the words reparation wine, I couldn't help but look at her. Xiao Shu was standing next to Shen Zai. Her calm face was also a little stunned, and when she looked back at Zhang Xuning, her eyes had deepened a little. Zhang Xuning glanced at everyone's reactions, and secretly complained in her heart. She wanted to explain that she and Shen Ju actually had no ambiguity. But His Royal Highness the King of Lindsay had already walked away after speaking. Where was the time for her to explain? And did she want her to say that she had given Shen Ju a slap, and this reparation wine was a slap? Won't you find death when you spread it? Shen Zai asked curiously, apology wine. Zhang Xuning smiled bitterly. In the past, when I was ignorant and messed around in the market, I had some misunderstandings with His Royal Highness the King of Lindsay. Shen Zai also wanted to ask what the misunderstanding was. But at this time, Zhang Xuaning's gaze had already turned to the front, and fell on the eunuch Zhang Bao who was kneeling at the gate of the palace, and his expression changed several times, as if he couldn't help but show a little compassion. Shen Zai naturally followed her gaze, and saw that it was just a little eunuch kneeling in front of the palace gate, and she didn't care, but she wondered why she reacted like this, so she said, "It is normal for someone in the palace to be punished, presumably it must be that they have made some mistake and punished for kneeling." Zhang Xuning said in a low voice, "When I came, I saw him kneeling here." Her voice was already weak, and she deliberately made a gesture of sorrow and panic, which was originally only 3 points of false sympathy and fear, but also performed a real and very empathetic fear. After all, the previous scene in Sina'ing Palace had only happened not long ago. As soon as Empress Dowager Xiao saw them, she asked them to kneel, and she didn't scream, giving them a big dismount, and those who were not brave would indeed be frightened. Shen Zai hasn't forgotten it. At this moment, when she saw Zhang Xuaning's expression, and saw the little eunuch kneeling beside her, she naturally guessed that she saw the little eunuch being punished and remembered the experience in the Sina'ing Palace, which aroused the fear of this deep palace, and felt that she was in danger of being blamed at every turn, just like this little eunuch. She couldn't help but complain in her heart that the Queen Mother was too strict, and she couldn't help but complain that the imperial sister-in-law didn't punish people early or late. Immediately raised his eyebrows, and the majesty of the Lady of Heaven returned to him. Shen Zai said directly to a female official standing in front of Cunning Palace, "What mistake did this eunuch make?" The female officer hurriedly bowed and saluted, and was about to answer, "His name is Zhang Bao, and he is uncertain and unaware of his mind when he serves today." "I don't want to hear it." Although it was Shen Zai who asked, it was also her who interrupted, with an impatient attitude, and gave a direct order with a wave of her hand. "People have been punished and have been kneeling for so long, it's almost over. Spare him." When the imperial sister-in-law asked, she said that it was the meaning of this princess. The eldest princess of Liang was already favored in the palace, and the saint invited her to go to school for the gentlemen of the Hanlin Academy, and also screened the companions, and the female officials served by the queen's side, so she was naturally clear about this. How could she dare to refute half a point when she heard her words? When he said, "Yes," then he instructed left and right, quickly, help people up, don't get in the way of His Highness's eyes here and scare people." The little eunuchs on both sides immediately stepped forward and helped the people up. Zhang Bao has been kneeling on this palace road for some time, his knees have long been sore, and he almost knelt down again when he just got up, and his originally beautiful face was even more intertwined with finger marks, only those eyes were as bright as paint. He raised his head and glanced at Zhang Xuning. However, unexpectedly, what caught his eyes did not seem to be a face that was as cowering as the voice he had just heard, but a pair of calm eyes hidden under the weakness, and they were also looking at him quietly at the moment. The delicate appearance of a bright flower made him feel that it was full of thorns. Zhang Xunning's eyelashes twitched, she lowered her eyes slightly, and when she raised it again, she was already smiling at Shen Zai. "Your Highness is so good." Shen Zai's face flushed again. She coughed, made a calm appearance, and snorted softly, "That's not it." Chapter 51, The Righteous Child's Mound. There is a strange subtlety to the atmosphere. Everyone didn't know if they felt something, their eyes wandered between Shen Zai and Zhang Xuning, probably thinking that the eldest princess of Liang was too good to Zhang Xuning. The eunuch named Zhang Bao had already retreated. Zhang Xuning had a major event in her heart, although she didn't know what the follow-up would be, but her originally tense body finally relaxed a little. If you use the words of Yu Fangyan in the previous life, what is her name? Come to think of it, it should be called Drama Spirit. Not good on the side, she is first class in her ability to act and pretend. But it's not that bad. Of course, she used Shen Zai to achieve her goal, but in another sense, it can be regarded as a good fate for Shen Zai, right? It is not counted as evil, it is not counted as evil. Zhang Xuning admonished herself a few words in her heart, and said, "Let's go." Shen Zai had nothing to say. Although she didn't go in the same direction as these companions when she returned to Mingfeng Palace, she actually took Zhang Xuning's hand and accompanied her all the way back to Yang's Hizai, and went into the hall to sit and talk to them for a while before leaving. Xiao Shu seemed a little silent throughout the process. When Shen Zai left, she glanced at it several times, as if she had something to say. But when he looked at the other people sitting in the hall, he didn't say anything. It wasn't until she saw Shen Zai get up and leave that she followed silently. Zhang Xuning turned her head and saw it, so she guessed that she had something to say to Shen Zai alone. Maybe it had something to do with today, Sinning Palace, and Empress Dowager Xiao. But no one can catch up and listen. As soon as Xiao Shu left, the hall was strangely quiet. "Everyone look at me, I look at you," no one spoke. After a long while, Fang Miakai patted his chest with palpitations, exhaled the breath he had been carrying all the way back, and sighed leisurely, "I just ran into this kind of thing when I entered the palace, but it almost scared me to death." The rest of the crowd nodded approvingly. Du said, "I don't know what's wrong with that Jade Ruyi." Zhang Xuning naturally knew that Yu Ruyi was so greasy that she was so silent at the moment. After all, she was standing down there and shouldn't have known. Yao Rongrong looked scared, but she was different from others. She was a little curious that she couldn't hide. In addition to being afraid, she hesitated again and again, but she lowered her voice and said timidly, "When the queen picked up the broken jade, it happened to be next to me, and I had a glimpse of the word. It's just, what does righteous boy mean?" Righteous boy. Fang Miao, who couldn't help frowning and pinching his fingers to calculate the good luck and evil for himself, heard these two words, his hands trembled, and he couldn't help but exclaim, looking at Yao Rongrong with almost a frightened look, and even his voice was a little distorted. "You saw those two words?" Yao Rongrong was completely frightened by Fang Miao's reaction. "Look, see." Zhou Baoying, who is the youngest and ignorant of the world, is the most confused. What's wrong with these two words? Asterisk. In the early winter afternoon, the sun in the sky is obscured by hazy clouds, and the edge of the steel forest of Bida Temple is already full of fallen leaves, and the thin branches of the trees tremble lightly in the cold wind. A large brass bell hangs high in the Cheyin Pavilion. Next to it is a low stone platform, on which a piano table, a tea table, and a lotus incense burner rests in the corner, and an incense seal placed at the end of it is only half burned. However, the next moment it was swept down in anger and collapsed. Bang dang! The lotus incense burner fell on the steps below, jumping down the steps one by one, and most of the white incense ash in the furnace poured out, occasionally embellished on a few dead leaves lying on the ground, which was shocking. Jianshu's eyelids couldn't stop jumping, and he pressed his head down, and he didn't dare to look up. I could only hear that the gentle and generous voice of the past was like ice condensation. It was Xie Wei who became extremely calm under his anger and asked, "Who let you do it?" Jianshu said, "When the subordinates learned the news, the order had already been issued, and when I asked them, I only said that it was news from Jinling, and I was quite impatient with my subordinates between words, but it seemed to be a little defensive. After the subordinates pretended to leave, they squatted there for half an hour, and saw a sedan chair coming from the direction of Lian Fang, and a person, in his 50s, was described as thin, with a handful of goatees, and wore a grey coat. When he is not in the palace and is not on business, Xie Wei is used to wearing white, unpretentious white clothes. This makes him seem more irrelevant to the troubles of the world, and does not touch the world. Is also dressed in white, and when worn on others, he may be a pawn of a peddler, but there is always a kind of unconcealable spaciousness on him. It's just that at this moment, this high wilderness can't help but give birth to a bit of fierceness. He asked, "What about Ding Fei?" Jianshu lowered his eyes and lowered his voice. After learning about this, Dayakan specially ordered someone to carefully review the secret letters sent to the capital by Ding Fei Gongzi in the past month, and there was no mention of today's incident. Xie Wei laughed, "My heart doesn't change, how do I know people's hearts?" Jianshu didn't understand this for a while, and wanted to say that when he was in Jinling, he didn't obey his words, but after Mr. went to Beijing, he also secretly reported the news in the sect from time to time, and he was obviously on Mr. S side in the sect. But just as he was about to speak, what he had just said went over from his mind. Gongai I Cheng has always been by the side of the sect leader and rarely leaves Jinling. Why did everyone else have already arrived in the capital, and Ding Fei Gongzi, who was also in Jinling, was still unaware of it and didn't give them any news? Thinking of this, Jianshu's heart was already awe-inspiring. What does Mr. mean? Xie Wei's snow-white sleeved robe was stained with a few points of incense ash, and he raised his finger and stroked it gently, but instead of wiping it off, it made this little bit of incense ash melt away and stain it even more. The eyebrows and eyes of Qing Yuan on weekdays are hidden and cold. His lips straightened, and his expression showed a faint danger, which only made people feel frightened. Since Gongai I Cheng is here, he is on the order of the sect leader. This is because I haven't moved for a long time, so I am guarded against. Jianshu remembered the complicated situation in the sect, and couldn't help frowning. Mr. has been running a business in the palace, but he hasn't done it yet. Now that Mr. Gongai I has come and given orders, completely ignoring your previous arrangement, and has the audacity to make waves with wishful lettering, it doesn't matter if they fail, if this implicates Mr. After all, the people involved are all the eyes and ears of Mr. in the palace. This is totally putting Mr. in danger. Xie Wei was silent, only raising his eyes to look at the steel forest in front of him. Fallen leaves spread all over the ground. Each stele in the forest of steles is 6 feet high and 1 foot wide, which is very different from ordinary stone tablets, and the inscriptions on them are not some Buddhist sayings, but one after another ordinary names. Even later, he simply didn't even engrave his name. Only blank stone tablets stand in the gloom of the mountains. Today's court situation is like an arrow on the string, and it is about to break out. It doesn't matter if I am implicated, I am afraid that this matter will be used by someone with a heart and harm other innocent people. He slowly closed his eyes, thinking of the personnel and the sect, and when he opened them again, the bottom of his dark eyes was already a solemn silence, and even revealed a bit of gloom. Destroy my plan. Lack of success, more than failure. Jianshu had already seen that the gang in the sect was not pleasing to the eye, and then he wanted to say something. It's just that out of the corner of his eye, he has caught a glimpse of someone coming from the back mountain. He is an old monk wearing a robe and kind eyes. So when he was about to say it, he swallowed it back. The old monk is the abbot of the White Pagoda Temple, the law name is Forget the Dust, and the people of the Buddha are honored to call him Master Forget the Dust, and today Xiaowei asked him to preach the scriptures. He came from a distance, and when he arrived in front of the Dechayan pavilion, he had already seen the messy incense ash in front of the steps. The footsteps stopped. Xiaowiren stood on the pavilion. He had clearly distinguished between solemn and cold, but when he turned around, he was gone. The corners of his lips were slightly bent like a spring breeze, and the green mountains were far away, so he only said, "The sword book is reckless," and he overturned the incense burner, "and I hope the master will not blame." Book of Swords. Master Forgetful Dust saluted and only said generously, "Amit Ba, it's okay." Asterisk. In Yang's his eye, people with a little bit of thought knew that since Fang Miao had such a big reaction to the 2 words Yao Rongrong said, he must know something. So they all asked. Fang Miao said, hearing the word Yaitong, "Can't you think of anything?" The crowd was a little confused. Zhang Xuning was silent. Chen Shi reacted quickly, her eyelids jumped, and she suddenly said, "What you mean, is it? Righteous Child Mound?" As soon as these words came out, someone suddenly said obviously remembering a little. "It's just that this matter is an old thing from 20 years ago, and most of them have only heard of it, and know that there is such a place, something happened, but they don't know what the specific situation was back then." Zhou Baoying was even more ignorant, and asked, What's the matter?" Fang Miao glanced at Chen Shi before saying, 20 years ago, when the king of Pingnan rebelled against the party and the heavenly sect rebelled against the party. King Pingnan was originally the brother of the former emperor, very brave and good at fighting, and was quite popular in the court. Can't stand the fact that the emperor married the Empress Dowager Xiao. Empress Dowager Xiao's brother is Xiao Yuan, the Duke of Dinghuo, behind him is the entire Xiao family, and at that time Xiao Yuan also married the sister of the Marquis of Yanji next door, that is, Yan Lin's aunt as his wife. The 2 most prominent families of the Great Qian dynasty were connected by in-laws and the first emperor to support the first emperor. How could the first emperor fail? So in the end, the throne changed, and it was the emperor who won. After he ascended the throne, he sent Pingnan Wang Yuan to the fief. Unexpectedly, King Pingnan was not reconciled, and secretly raised troops, and actually colluded with the heavenly sect, which was widely spread among the people and attracted many believers, and his power grew stronger and stronger. 20 years ago, together with the head of the heavenly sect, he waved his troops north and went straight to the capital. Heavy troops surrounded the entire palace. The first emperor was hunting in Shanglin Yuan at that time, but he avoided a catastrophe and was escorted by the elite soldiers of Shanglin Yuan and fled all the way to the north. However, Empress Dowager Xiao, who was still the queen at the time, and Shen Lang, who was still the prince at the time, remained in the palace. It's also strange to say this, the elite soldiers of King Pingnan and the chaotic party of Tianjiao entered the palace, but there was no trace of the Queen Mother and the saint, so it was suspected that there was a secret passage in the palace, so they escaped from the palace. When Fang Miao said this, her voice paused, and a faint fear appeared in her expression, but the rebels have already besieged the city. If the Empress Dowager and the Holy Lord escape from the palace at this time, they must pass through various city gates before they can get out of the city, so they will immediately send heavy troops to guard the city gates, and no one will be released. The king of Pingnan hated the former emperor to the core, and refused to give up until he found His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, so he sent people to search the capital from house to house, and all the boys who were over 4 years old, under 12 years old, or more than 3 feet tall were arrested. The crowd shuddered when they heard this. Zhang Xuning already felt a little sick to her stomach. Fang Miao's voice was a little difficult, but there was a force in the dark that pushed her down, as if this matter should be known to many people. At that time, many people in Beijing had already escaped in advance after hearing about the war, but there were still many families in Beijing, so there were more than 300 boys arrested. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince was about 8 years old that year, and King Pingnan caught the palace people who had served His Royal Highness in the palace to identify him, but none of the more than 300 boys was the prince. Then the king of Pingnan was furious. The capital has been surrounded by iron barrels, he does not believe that people can still fly with wings, so he sent an order to the whole city, if anyone hides the prince, it is better to hand it over as soon as possible, otherwise all the more than 300 boys who have been arrested will be slaughtered. Zhou Baoying should have never heard of this before, her eyes were already round, and she asked softly, "Later, what about later?" Fang Miao's face turned a little pale, and he only said, "Later, when the reinforcements of Dingguogong and Yan Jiho hurriedly retreated from the rebels, and when they reopened the closed city gate and entered Beijing, they only saw a mountain of corpses, all stacked at the gate of the palace. It had been snowing heavily for 3 days, and the people were frozen together, and the blood was condensed into ice, and they couldn't move even if they took the iron drill, and they didn't dare to move any more because they might still have the flesh and skin of the people attached to it. When the snow turns to water, people are rotten. Gross. Yao Shi, who had been listening and didn't speak, finally couldn't help it, covered his mouth and ran out of the house. The faces of the others were also very ugly. Fang Miao's stomach was actually churning, thinking of the scene in Sinaing Palace today. He trembled more and more. Later, these more than 300 children were ordered by the emperor to be buried and erected in Baida Temple, which was the righteous child who died to save the prince, so the steel forest of Baida Temple is also called Righteous Child Mound. I heard that the 7-year-old little prince of the Dingguo mansion at that time was also among them. Counting, it should be brother Xiaoshu. It's just that in terms of background, I don't know how much higher than today's Xiaoshu. After all, in addition to being the son of the Xiao family, his biological mother is also the sister of Yan Jiho Yan Mu, which is an unprecedented bloodline conceived by the two families. Although the Qing Yuan Bafo declined, Yu Yu had also heard of this incident, and it was inevitable that she would come out to show off. Speaking of which, Mrs. Yan was heartbroken after losing her son, and she separated from Dingguogong that year, returned to Yanji's mansion, and died of illness soon after. The Yan family and the Xiao family seemed to have no contact after this incident. Yao Rongrong suddenly let out an ah. She was very surprised, so, Miss Xiao is actually from the Steppe family. Bang! As soon as she finished speaking, the half-hidden door in front of the hall was pushed open and slammed against the wall, causing a loud bang that frightened everyone to look back. It was Xiaoshu standing at the door. His face was unprecedentedly fierce, and he only said coldly, "What are you talking nonsense? Chapter 52, Ime. Everyone talked behind closed doors, and even the palace maids were sent away. Where did Yao Rongrong think of it? But when she thought of this, she suddenly mentioned it, and she happened to be heard by Xiao Shu, who had gone and returned, and was panicked and confused for a while, with a red face and red ears. Regardless of whether Xiao Shu is from the step room or not, she can't afford to provoke her. The man immediately stood up from his seat, bowed his head in a winch, and apologized, "We didn't mean to." Xiao Shu sneered, "Although my mother is a step family, she is also married by my father Ming Media, there is nothing that can't be said. It's just that in this palace, you have eaten the bear's heart and leopard gall, and you dare to talk about anything when you know something unclear. I'm afraid that a head has grown on your neck for too long, and it's boring, right?" Everyone's faces suddenly changed slightly. Zhang Xuning watched coldly. Xiao Shu only said, "You must know what you say today, if I expose it, no one will be able to eat good fruit. Tomorrow I want to learn the book of songs and follow Mr. Xie to learn the piano. With this kung fu to die, why not go to Wenshu and practice the piano?" Everyone remembered the situation in Sinaing Palace today, and they all still had palpitations. The people who talked about it were fascinated, and the people who listened were also fascinated and didn't react. At this time, Xiao Shu was scared into a cold sweat when she said a little, not to mention that she didn't smile when she saw her eyebrows condensed, and she was afraid of offending her, and she was really accused of going to the Queen Mother or the palace, so they all resigned themselves to it. Zhang Xuning naturally didn't have anything to say. And they scattered, and she departed with her. What is the development of the matter of the Ministry of Internal Affairs dedication to Yu Ruyi? I don't know anything about Yang's his eye here, but I vaguely heard some killing movements outside. In the evening, everyone sat down to eat together, and no one dared to say a word. The atmosphere is awkward and subtle. Only Xiao Shu was calm and relaxed, as if she had nothing to do, and after dinner, she went to make tea and asked others if they wanted to come and drink together. It's just that who dares to do this? Chen Shiyi and Yao Shi, who were good friends with her, and Zhou Baoying, who only likes to eat less tendons, stayed to have tea with her. Zhang Xuning was naturally the one who left. After returning to the room, she lit a lamp in front of the bookcase and took out a volume of the Book of Songs, wanting to prepare for school tomorrow. After all, in the previous life, she was miserable in her studies, but in this life, she had to stay honestly under Xie Wei's nose for half a year, and she was afraid that it would not be so easy to fool the past. It's one thing to think, it's another thing to do. The book was placed in front of her, and it was brightly lit by the lamp next to it, but every word fell on the book like ants crawling all over the ground, which disturbed her so much that she couldn't read a word. For a while, I thought of the disaster of the Marquis of Yanji's mansion, and at the same time, I thought of the rebellious proverbs behind Yu Ruyi, and finally the various of the 300 righteous children's mounds that Fang Miao said. It's all staggered and flashing in my mind. Zhang Xuning only felt a splitting headache, threw away the book and lay on the bed to sleep, but she couldn't sleep. She stayed up until midnight with her eyes open, and she didn't know what time to fall asleep. You can think about it day and dream at night. In the dream, there was a patch of blood, a patch of snow, the sword fell, and the cries and howls of 300 children in terror and despair resounded in the heavy snow, mixed with the cold and whimpering north wind, and spread far and wide. She looked at her again for a while, and Xie Wei stared at her from the mountain of corpses. When she got up the next day, Zhang Xuning's eyes were blue and black. The palace maids who came in with water to serve her and freshened up were startled. But she was silent, dipped in fat powder in the makeup mirror, and carefully covered the haggard around her eyes little by little, and when she walked out of the house, she was radiant again, so that people could not see the flaws. Asterisk. Today is the official start of school, and there are 2 classes in the morning. Mao Zheng arrived at Chen is the first class, a total of 1 hour, followed the Hanlin Academy attendant to teach Zhao Yanhong to learn the Book of Songs. Chen Zheng 2 to Si Zheng 2 quarter is the second class, and it is also an hour, follow the prince and young master Xie Wei to learn the piano. So the first to come in the morning was Robin Zhao. This gentleman is also 40 or 50 years old, and he is considered to be a scholar in the Hanlin Academy, and he is not very deep in the political situation of the court, but he has learned a good ability to become inflammatory. Zhang Xuning knew that he and the other 2 gentlemen looked down on women. But after reading a book with him today, I realized that even if you look down on women, you have to be graded. The Book of Songs is divided into 3 parts, Wind, Ya, and Song, and the first lesson is the famous article Guanju in national style, Zhounan, which requires familiarity with reading, but Zhao Yanhong just taught them to read, saying that this poem is generally written around something, but he does not explain to everyone what each poem means. Wrote. Although everyone is selected to read with them, not everyone is very good at this knowledge, and there are also uneven places. So Zhang Xuning dared to ask what the word Mao in jagged wattles, left and right with Mao meant. Unexpectedly, Zhao Yanhong's face changed, and he actually scolded her. I explained that I wanted to go back to study during my opening speech yesterday, but now you can ask casually in the school? I don't know what to read. Zhang Xuning couldn't go up or down in one breath. I only scolded in my heart. The teacher preaches and teaches to solve doubts. If this palace knows everything, he will cut off your dog's head first, and what the hell do you want you to do? It's just that respecting the teacher is a beam on the head after all. She finally sat down without saying anything. If it's just like this, after all, maybe this bullshit Zhao Yanhong is this virtue, and he does this to everyone. But who would have thought that when he was reciting the poems, he called Xiao Shu up, and after listening to her recite, he was amazed, and actually took the initiative to ask. The word Mao in the sentence left and right with Mao in this last section has always been relatively obscure, but if you want to understand its meaning, you only need to connect it with the previous one. Xiao Shu said coldly, "Sir, I know." Zhao Yanhong was stunned for a moment, a little embarrassed, and the next moment he covered up the past and said, Oh, it's good to know, it's good to know is worthy of being a noble daughter of the Xiao family, her knowledge is really outstanding, and with you to accompany Her Royal Highness the eldest princess, you can rest assured. Everyone found it difficult to put into words. Shen Zai, who was sitting in the middle of the front row, frowned even more. Zhang Xuning glanced at the front and knew that this Zhao Yanhong was pedantic and sour, but he was afraid that he didn't need her to make a small report, and he also put his name on Shen Zai's side, but I don't know if Shen Zai can tolerate him. Before the class reached Chenzheng, Zhao Yanhong stopped, sat aside and drank tea, and only asked them to read by themselves. When the copper omission next to him was outdated, he put on a posture and accepted everyone's salute, took the book on the case, and swaggered out. Xie Wei collided with him when he came. Zhao Yanhong was taken aback. Master Xie's class at the second quarter, why did he come so early? Xie Wei was in a bad mood today, and it was windy outside, so he put on a blue crane, obliquely held a piano in a black piano bag, and stood still under the steps of Fengchen Palace, and when he heard Zhao Yanhong say this, his brows furrowed secretly. It's just that such a subtle expression is not easy to be noticed. He smiled lightly. The first time I teach the piano, I don't dare to slack off, just in case, make more preparations, so I came early. I see. Zhao Yanhong really felt that he was making a big fuss, and it was not even necessary to compile the book specially compiled, but after all, Xie was a high-ranking official who crushed people to death, and it was far from being an idle function like them, so he only said, "Mr. Xie is really meticulous, and he is ashamed. So you won't miss your time." He bowed his hand goodbye. Xie didn't return the salute by holding the qin, and only bowed to him slightly. At this time, one of them came down the stairs, and the other went down the stairs. Zhang Xuning was sitting close to the hall gate, and he almost listened to this conversation, and his body, which had been relaxed because of the end of the previous class, suddenly stiffened again. Then a shadow fell on her bookcase. It was Xie Weiqian who walked in from outside the hall and passed by her bookcase. She didn't dare to turn her head. It wasn't until she caught a glimpse of a dark blue robe passing by her that she quietly raised her head and looked up. Xie walked to the hall and stood still, did not speak, only lowered his eyebrows and lowered his eyes and put the piano he was holding before on the piano table. After going to the piano bag, he stroked the strings with his hands, tried the sound, and then slowly lowered his palm, slightly pressed the strings, and erased the tail note of the trembling strings. The two sounds of the trial sound are like mountain springs hitting stones, and they are like the wind surging at the bottom of the stream, which makes people's hearts feel light. How to say it first or not to say it to the person who caresses the qin must be an excellent piano. Zhang Xuning looked at the piano fixedly, only to see that the body of the piano was dark red and almost black. The lacquer color was extremely heavy, and there were hidden lines like flowing water and auspicious clouds, which looked not old. Even if she couldn't see the name of the piano engraved on the belly, she also recognized at a glance that this was the most commonly used one of Xie's own pianos, called Yimei. My heart didn't hold back a tightening. She really has no talent in the piano, neither knows how to play, nor does she know how to listen, and her usual cleverness is all scattered when it comes to learning the piano, like an elm pimple. In the last life, I almost didn't cry when I learned the piano. Fortunately, she became addicted to skipping school later, and no one came to pursue her. Zhang Xuning didn't recognize many pianos, and Xie was one of them. It was a day after the snow. The entire palace red walls and green tiles were covered by silver snow. She and Zhang Xia walked on the long road outside the cunning palace, and heard the faint sound of the piano from the side hall of the Fengchen Hall in front of her. So I stopped. But it didn't take long for the sound to stop. After a while, Xie came out of the side hall with the qin, passed by the road in front of them, turned his head and saw her standing with Zhang Xia, glanced at her, and then looked at Zhang Xia, and didn't say anything, and went straight to the Qianqing Palace. Zhang Xia said that the name of the piano is Yimei. Zhang Xuning asked him curiously, "Where is the pawn?" Zhang Xia said he didn't know. Zhang Xuning thinks about it. Yimei Mountain North Snow Polar Eye, the abbot is ice in the sea? Zhang Xia still shook his head. It wasn't until Xie burned the qin to rebel that Zhang Xuning remembered that there was a rare and little-known poem, saying, "A high name is full of imperial capital, and when you return, you will make Yimei you." Chapter 53, Learning the Piano. Did Xie become the emperor in the first generation, or did he go to get that Yimei you? She was a little confused when she thought about it. But if you think about it carefully, you have done so many things that have been disapproved by the world, and you have caused so many sins. If you don't end up being the emperor, I'm afraid the end won't be much better, right? Because it was not yet time for class, Xie sat aside after trying the piano and didn't say a word to them. It stands to reason that this is a break between the two courses, and everyone can walk around and rest at will. But Xie sat there with a strange deterrent power, so that people didn't dare to make loud noises, or even dare to move around at will, and everyone stayed in their positions very obediently, lest they leave a bad impression on him. In this way, the whole hall is pure, and there is a rare calm. It wasn't until the 2 moments of rest had passed that Xie got up again and stood on the hall. At this moment, the 9 students below, including the eldest princess of Liang, all stood up and bowed to him. Students, wait to meet Mr. Xie. Xie waved his hand and said, no need to be polite. On the high bookcase rests a ring ruler. He lowered his eyes and looked at it, picked it up and played with it at will, and after telling everyone to sit down, he said, what I want to learn today is the piano. Xie knew that most of the young ladies, including Her Royal Highness the eldest princess, already knew about this. But now, since they have all learned the piano with Xie, please forget everything you have learned in the past, and treat yourself as if you have not learned, start from scratch and start again. Zhang Xuning felt a headache in his fingers when he saw him holding the ring ruler. Hearing Xie words again, I felt that it was no different from the previous life. In her previous life, she was happy when she first heard these words, and if she wanted to learn from scratch, she might not be worse than those ladies. However, the truth is brutal. Sometimes, I have to admit that God is very fair. If you give her a good look, you will not give her a comfortable family background, and a good talent for piano, chess, calligraphy, and painting. The ancients said that there were 5 stars in the sky, 5 elements in the earth, and 5 tones in the world. Therefore, legend has it that at the earliest, Shennong's kutung for the piano, the rope for the strings, only the palace, shang, the horn, the sign, the feather 5 tones, the upper 5 stars, the lower should be 5 elements, played for the holy sound. Later, King Wen of Zhou was imprisoned in Jinli, thinking of his son Bo Yikao, and added a thread, which was called the composition string. Since then, it has been collectively called the Wenwu lyre. Xie held the ruler, but his hand was behind him. The people walked down from the temple, their eyes passing over the faces of the people below. It's not easy to learn the piano, and sometimes it's even more difficult than reading. It is said that those who learn the piano in 3 years and become successful in 5 years, and in 7 years are based on the theory of art, but learning the piano is Tao, and it can be called successful with Tao. But you are not very old, only half a year, you really can't learn anything. If you can get the fur, a little bit of the technique, it is not bad. So today Xie will start from sitting and fingering. He was accustomed to teaching books for the emperor and the Manchu dynasty in Wenyuan Pavilion, and teaching this group of little girls really had the meaning of killing chickens with a knife. Like the previous Mr. Zhao of the Hanlin Academy was not very impatient, but he was calm and calm. Neither is he condescending to the top, nor does he look down on them. Standing in the Fengchen Hall to lecture to these little girls in front of him is no different from standing in the Wenyuan Pavilion to give a lecture to the 95 honor. Everyone had seen Zhao Yanhong's impatient posture when he gave a lecture to them before, and when they thought that Xie was the emperor who gave a lecture for the emperor and the civil and military officials in the previous dynasty, they all heard that Mr. Xie was known as a saint, but they were inevitably worried that he was as fierce as Mr. Zhao. Hearing him so generous at this moment, I can't help but feel relieved. Those who were a little bolder and more familiar with Xie, such as Shen Zai, even tentatively raised their little hands. Then how many years has Mr. Xie studied the piano, what kind of realm is it now? Xie glanced back at her and said with a smile, I have been learning the piano since I was 4 years old, and now I can barely touch the threshold. The crowd couldn't help but be stunned. Shen Zai even broke her fingers to help him calculate, and her mouth couldn't help but open wide. I have to study for more than 20 years, and this is only a small. Xie said, I'm stupid. If Her Royal Highness the eldest princess is talented, intelligent, and spiritual, it may not take so long. He was right in front of Zhang Xuning when he stopped. Zhang Xuning heard him say the word dull, so he couldn't help but look up at him, if the surname Syed is called dull, then is there still a smart person in this world? However, Xiewei's face did not have the kind of pleasantness that others deliberately humbled themselves to, on the contrary, they were serious and low. Then she realized. Xiejuan really felt that he was stupid, and Yu Qin said that more than 20 years can only be regarded as a small success. Because they are going to learn the piano today, all the people have their pianos on the table. Zhang Xunning's piano is no exception. The banana was in front of her. Xiehui lowered his eyes, his gaze swept over her, and he naturally fell on this qin, and he didn't know if he recognized it, so he looked at it for a while before he raised his eyes again and looked at Zhang Xunning with scrutinizing eyes. The hairs on Zhang Xunning's back stood upside down. Fortunately, Xiehui didn't seem to say anything because of this qin and didn't mean to say anything, and quickly turned around from her and returned to the hall. This is when I officially started teaching the piano. The first thing to learn is to sit. This is not a difficult task for everyone. After all, when I entered the palace a few days ago, I had already learned to walk, sit, and lie down with Su Shang'ai, although the sitting posture when playing the piano was slightly different from the sitting posture taught by Su Shang'ai, it could never deviate from its roots, and it was always impossible to shake the body, not move the head, not look at it, not hear it, and there were rules for sitting. Zhang Xunning was a person who had experienced the baptism of the palace in her previous life, and she had already been in the limelight on Su Shang'ai's side before, but at this moment, she was in front of Xiehui, so she naturally didn't dare to be sloppy. Xiehui looked at them one by one and nodded. At the end, he stopped in front of her, but it was rare to be a little impressed, and said, "Not bad." When Zhang Xunning heard these two words, she was calm on the surface, and she couldn't wait to grab the ground with her head in her heart. Xiehui originally thought she was good enough to praise her, but when she looked at it after the praise, she was inexplicably a little weak on her face, and her expression was reluctant, sitting in front of the Jiaoan Gukan, as if she was sitting on a needle felt. Afraid of this? Although he didn't know how he became a flood beast, he only thought that he was scaring her, and he didn't think much about it. Until I learned fingering next. Xiehui started from the 8 methods of his right hand, and prepared to go step by step, from easy to difficult, so he first talked about wiping, picking, hooking, and picking, and he first demonstrated it to everyone, and then asked them to follow suit. Some of them have already learned, so they will naturally do it again. A simple and staccato piano sound sounded in the Fengchen Palace. However, there is always a moment, either in a hurry, or slowly, sometimes short, sometimes long, and perhaps mixed with the murmur of a finger accidentally touching another string. Xiehui's brows suddenly furrowed. Originally, a piano note was mixed in with the many untidy staccato sounds, and it was not obvious. But he has studied the piano for many years, and his attainments are quite profound, and he has already practiced a good ear, and listening to this piano sound only feels like a blunt sword cutting beautiful jade, and a rusty knife cutting brocade. Abrupt and unpleasant, it is extremely harsh. After listening to it 4 or 5 times, he finally couldn't bear it anymore, and looked towards the place where the sound of the piano came from. Who is Zhang Xunning if not? People sit behind the piano, looking at the posture of the deputy stroking the qin, especially she has a face that is far better than others, delicate and bright, coupled with 10 fingers, it is pleasing to the eye when you put it on the strings. However, when the finger fell on the piano, it was disorganized. How do you look like chicken feet? When the finger drops, it doesn't know how heavy it is, when it's light, it's like blowing cotton, and when it's heavy, it's like being able to cut the strings. Xiehui watched the strings vibrate and moan under her fingers, only to feel that a breath was blocked in her heart, and her eyelids jumped up. Sitting in such a posture, but playing like this. No wonder Fang just praised her for saying that she was going to be empty-hearted. Jiang Xuning didn't know that she had been targeted by Xie Wei, but she felt that her hands didn't obey her. When the rouge gouache is applied, it is steady, and as soon as it falls on the strings, it loses its accuracy and cannot be touched. It's not surprising to think about it. Other daughters' families have learned to be female-read when they are young, but she is the only one at that age, who is still running around the countryside, fishing in the river, catching cicadas in the trees, and tethering other people's chickens and ducks to go out for a walk. I've never learned anything delicate and elegant. I don't have much interest in the piano. Good sounds like it sounds, but that's it. Where can you hear anything ugly? These hands, this heart, want her to learn the piano, but don't you want her life? The more Jiang Xuning played, the more she felt that her voice was different from others, and the more empty her heart became, and when she looked up by chance, Xie Wei was already standing in front of her. Her hand shook and she almost didn't break the strings. Xie Wei looked at her condescendingly and asked, "Haven't you learned?" Jiang Xuning felt that her whole body was stiff, and she replied tremblingly, "Didn't Mr. say that he didn't learn it, start from scratch, and start over?" Xie Wei's eyelids jumped again. Jiang Xuning then felt a chill on the back of her neck. Xie Wei endured it without having a seizure, and then glanced at the piano pressed under her hand, and only said, "You sit down, don't spoil this piano." Sure enough, I saw the origin of the piano. Jiang Xuning suddenly screamed in her heart, and secretly said that she should have thought of it a long time ago. The surname Xie Hokan is addicted. Yan Lin said that looking for Jiang Hokan to go to school will be able to please him, but he doesn't know that not everyone can play the good qin. If people are not worthy of the qin, they are afraid that not only will they not please Xie Wei, but they will dislike him. Now she doesn't deserve the piano. Although Xie Wei lowered his voice with these two words from her, Fengshan Hall was such a big place, how could others not hear it? For a while, the sound of practicing the piano around me was a little quieter. The subtle and different eyes of everyone fell on her. Jiang Xuning heard Xie Wei tell her to sit down, so she didn't dare to reach out and touch the piano anymore, and wondered if she was not worthy of the piano, so it would not be a waste to change the one she deserved, right? So I said, "Xie, Mr. Xie." Xie Wei saw that she obediently didn't touch the piano, and the string in his head that had just been stretched up was finally loosened for 2 minutes, and he was just about to turn around and walk away, when he heard her voice. He couldn't help but stop. Jiang Xuning's heart raised her throat, and she mustered up the courage to say, "Why don't I change to a bad piano?" Xie Wei's heavy ring ruler was pressed in the palm of his hand, and his slender fingers couldn't help but clench it so tightly, and when he looked at her again, the corners of his eyes twitched slightly, and his gaze sank. And when she was obedient? Unexpectedly, I didn't think about how I could be worthy of the piano, but I had to change to a bad piano to match myself. He had a cold face, only took the ring ruler, pointed to the outside of the temple door, and said, "You go out first." Jiang Xuning was stunned. She looked in the direction Xie Wei pointed, and there was a bang in her head, completely blank. It is as if a man has lost his soul. Even though there were 10,000 words of confusion and 10,000 words of unwillingness in her abdomen, she couldn't say a word to Xie Wei, and her eyes were red for a while, until she got up and walked out of the hall and stood on the edge of the pillar outside. She didn't understand where she offended him again, and she was about to be punished by him to stand and lose face. Even in her previous life, she had never suffered such grievances. Jiang Xuning didn't sleep well last night, worried about the affairs of the Yanji Marquis mansion, and this morning he followed Xie Wei Swekin to tense his nerves, lest he get angry, standing under the porch at the moment. The more he thought about it, the more angry he became. It's just without Yu Fangyan in the previous life, it's okay to use Zhou Yunzi for the affairs of the Marquis of Yanji, and when she comes back from rebirth, she has to be slipped under the nose of Xie Weidi, but she hasn't done anything really bad in this life. Why treat her so harshly? It was originally a grievance of 3 points, but when I think about it, it becomes 10 points. Zhang Xuning didn't know where she was poked. All the sorrows in her past life and this life came out of her head, and as soon as her eyes were hot, the tears fell down. She raised her sleeve and wiped it. But the tears were wiped more and more, and they didn't listen to her at all. Xie Wei originally said, "You go out first," and he only planned to talk to the others first to explain their practice, so he came out to talk to her alone. But who expected that the words of the explanation were not half-spoken, and a faint choked sound was heard outside. He turned to look out of the hall and froze. The brightly colored girl wore a snow-green elastic ink skirt today, with a slender figure, standing beside the pillar under the porch, as if she had been greatly wronged, crying and wiping her tears, which was really angry and funny. It's just that she was attacked on the way back to Beijing that year, and she fell all over the mud, and she didn't seem to have cried. Xie Wei looked at her, feeling a little offended, raised his hand and gently pressed his eyebrows, couldn't help but soften his voice a little, and said, "Don't cry, come in." Zhang Xuning's choked voice suddenly stopped. She felt that her crying actually had nothing to do with Xie Wei, but she had made a bigger grievance out of such a small grievance, and she only thought about the hard-hearted heart surnamed Xie in her heart, afraid that she would let herself stand outside for an hour. Who would have thought that he would suddenly call himself in? In addition to being surprised, I was also a little stunned. Zhang Xuning's expression became a little stranger. In a flash, a thought quickly passed through his mind, "Isn't it, Xie Wei actually ate this?" She couldn't believe it. However, thinking about it carefully, did she cry in front of Xie Wei in her previous life? Nope. Not once. Zhang Xuning's heart moved, and after the tears stopped for a moment, she choked again. If you really want to cry, you can cry, and you can come when you say it. It's just that this time it looks real, but it's actually fake. Sure enough, Xie Wei showed a little headache again, and said to her, "I didn't want to punish you, come back and sit down." It worked. Zhang Xuning almost laughed out loud in her heart. Who would have thought that Xie Wei's death hole would be here? She only knew how to deal with Xie Wei, and she couldn't help but be extremely happy when she thought that this person's prestige would eventually fall into her own hands. But his face was still aggrieved, and with a low "oh," he walked in from outside the hall and returned to his place to sit down. Then Xie Wei glanced at her and said lightly, "After school later, you will stay alone." Zhang Xuning. It's that I'm too young and too early to rejoice. Chapter 54, Open a Small Stove. Once, Zhang Xuning had thought about the 18 practices of Sage Kong, and now, she couldn't help but start thinking about her 18 methods. Everyone suddenly felt a little more sympathetic in the strange eyes that looked at her before. After all, jealousy is jealousy, and despise is despise. No one thought that he would be detained by Mr. if he played the piano a little worse. No matter how gentle Mr. Xie looks, for a student, this kind of thing can be called bad news, which is really terrifying. So, in the next time, everyone took Zhang Xuning as a lesson from the past. Even Shen Zai, who had a relaxed demeanor before, also practiced the piano with great spirits, lest the next one to be left by Mr. would be himself. Zhang Xuning was speechless. For the whole hour she sat in her place, and did not dare touch the harp. At the end of school, everyone got up and saluted Xie Wei to say goodbye. Zhang Xuning couldn't help but look at the others. Seems to be Xiao Shu, who is inconspicuous, just glanced at her. It seems that Yu, who has clearly had a holiday with her, snorted softly from her nose, quite gloating. Fang Miao looked at her with pity and handed her a helpless look. Zhang Xuning knew that everyone else was unreliable, but she still tried to grasp the last straw, and couldn't help but shout when Shen Zai passed by, "Your Royal Highness the eldest princess." Shen Zai walked over and shook her hand, and said seriously, "Mr. Xie is very good, you have to work hard." Zhang Xuning. Shen Zai also nodded at her encouragingly, clenched her fists, and then walked out of the hall. A little desperate. People are gone. Most of the palace people who were waiting for them were scattered. The sky outside was shining white on the window paper. Xie Wei put his Zhang Yimei into the piano bag, hugged it in his arms, walked down from the hall, only glanced at her and said, "Follow." Zhang Xunning's heart was so cold that she was about to keep up. But he didn't expect to take a step, and Xie Wei's footsteps stopped. His eyes drooped, and half of the light at the entrance of the temple fell on his eyelashes and pupils, and the deeper and darker they became, reminding her, Qin. Zhang Xuning reacted at this time, turned around and carefully hugged the banana that she had basically not touched much today. Xie Wei walked out of the hall and went straight to the side hall. After all, he is still a little different from other gentlemen, and he has always presided over the feast in the palace over the years, and this time the palace will open up the side hall of the Fengchen Hall for him for rest. The closer Zhang Xuning got to the side hall, the more her eyelids jumped. When he arrived at the door of the hall, there was a little eunuch leaning under the porch and waiting, and when he saw Xie Wei coming, he quickly stood up straight, and came up with a smile on his face. "The young master has worked hard, is this school?" Xie Wei let out a faint The eunuch was about to go down to the tea house next door to make tea, but when he retreated, he couldn't help but glance at Zhang Xuning curiously, as if he was wondering why young master Xie would bring a girl here. Xie Wei entered the side hall. Zhang Xunning's footsteps stopped at the entrance of the hall, as if there was some kind of Longtan tiger's den inside, and he didn't dare to step in. Xie Wei didn't look back. "Come in." Zhang Xunning's heart was crossed, thinking that now that he was in the palace, even if Xie Wei had the ability in secret, he would not kill people in broad daylight, so he stepped in. A warm breath suddenly came to my face. She couldn't help but be stunned. The side hall is much smaller than the main hall, and the layout is not so open, but except for the open door and the window to the east, the doors and windows are closed in other places, and there is also a stove that burns silver charcoal. The cold floor tiles were covered with a thick velvet blanket, and it was silent when stepped on. Tall bookshelves act as partitions. It is full of all kinds of ancient books. Walking around the bookshelf, you can see a bookcase, a piano table, and a long wooden platform in the northeast corner, on which there are several long pieces of wood, and tools such as rope and ink, planers, and carving knives are resting beside them. Xie Wei hung up his piano, then turned to Zhang Xuning and pointed to the vacant piano table, but he sat down on the side of the warm kong by the window, lowered his eyes and said, "I heard that the second girl Ning rescued a little eunuch named Zhang Bao at the gate of Cunning Palace yesterday." Zhang Xuning had just put the piano down, and she almost knelt down in fright when she heard this. She thought that Xie Wei really wanted to guide her to play the piano when she left herself alone, but she didn't expect that when she just entered this side hall, she opened her mouth like this, and suddenly her cold hairs stood up. Saving Zhang Bao that day was in full view of everyone, even if she wanted to deny it, she couldn't deny it, not to mention that now she was asked by Xie Wei in person. This is a person who will rebel in the future, and he will definitely have his own eyes and ears in the palace. If you pretend to be crazy and stupid in front of Xie Wei, you are looking for death. Zhang Xuning forced herself to calm down and replied sneeringly, yes. Xie Wei's thoughts came up with thoughts, and he actually said to her, Wang Xinyi, the eunuch of the palm print of the celebrant eunuch, is a celebrity around the saint, although Zhang Bao works in the harem and is an inconspicuous eunuch in Cunning Palace, but Wang Xinyi has always been blue-eyed to him secretly, even if Zhang Bao is half of his master, and because Zhang Bao is loyal and very filial, he has been looking for an opportunity to promote him recently. Second, Miss Ning's kindness was very coincidental. Zhang Xuning never expected him to know. The most secret plan in her heart hadn't been put on for a day at all, and the next day it was cracked, which really frightened her. She subconsciously wanted to lie and deny it. You can raise your head and only meet Xie Wei's clear gaze, as if she has seen her through, and all the courage that has just surged out for a while has been wiped out, and she only feels that her throat is dry and she can't speak. Xie Wei looked at her calmly, do you know this and intend to save him? Zhang Xuning didn't dare to admit it. After all, Xie Wei had already warned her when she entered the palace last time, asking her to stay under his nose obediently and not make trouble or make him angry. But he didn't dare to lie in front of Xie Wei. Because the end of lying is even worse. In an instant, his thoughts turned 1,000 times, and at the critical moment, Zhang Xuning suddenly remembered the trick he had used to deal with Xie Wei in the main hall of Fengchen Palace, so he flattened the corners of his lips, lowered his eyebrows, and buried his head in a deflated mouth. There are so many sad things that you can cry just by thinking about it. When she raised her eyes again, her eyes were red, and tears were stored in her eyes, which were about to overflow like the rising tide of Pinghu, and she opened her mouth aggrievedly, there are so many things in the palace, what Wang Xinyi and Wang Lei, I am only a few days after entering the palace, how can I know so much? Xie Wei looked at her and didn't speak. Zhang Xuning felt that his reaction was a little wrong, not quite the same as what he had thought before, and he couldn't help but beat a little drum in his heart. But the play has already been performed, is it possible to take it back? She stubbornly continued to fake crying, what's more, it wasn't that I wanted to save the little eunuch named Zhang Bao at the beginning, it was when we went back and passed by. We saw His Royal Highness the King of Linzi standing in front of him and seemed to want to save it, but later His Highness forgot about it. I saw that the little eunuch was pitiful, so I said a word to Her Royal Highness the eldest princess. It was Her Royal Highness the eldest princess who really spoke to save people. Mr. Xie kept saying that he wanted to believe me, but now he looks like he wants to believe me. The girl is just in her prime. Her appearance is beautiful, her facial features are delicate and bright, and she is even a little cold and glamorous. However, when he cried, he lowered his eyebrows and eyes, and made a small posture with a low bow, pretending to be pitiful. There is a little bit of cunning and little bad engraved in the bones. While crying and pretending to look at him inadvertently, the black and white eyes are like moist glass, and the circulation is a little seductive. Xie Wei couldn't help but think, does he look like a person who eats this set? Zhang Xuning cried at first because she felt that Xie Wei had eaten this, thinking that she might be able to get by relying on this, but Xie Wei looked at her with this thoughtful gaze, as if she was unmoved. The more I cry, the more bottomless my heart becomes. At this moment, there was a light knock outside the door, and it was the little eunuch who came in with tea and said, "Young master, tea." Her choking stopped. The little eunuch brought 2 teas, one on the Kong table next to Xie Wei's hand, and the other on the piano table in front of Zhang Xuning. I don't know if I heard what happened in this side hall before, let alone look up to take a second look, and bowed down and retreated after putting the teacup away. Xie Wei picked up the teacup, opened the tea lid, and stopped listening to the crying, only raised his eyebrows, "Don't cry, Zhang Xuning. At this time, if you can't see that Xie actually doesn't eat this, it is really mentally retarded. She was honest. Suddenly I didn't seem to be so sad. Xie let out an "oh," took a sip of tea with a pleasant attitude, and looked at her with a smile. I can't see it, I don't know how to learn the piano, and it's very strong to pretend to cry. Zhang Xuning was sullen. Aren't you afraid of your punishment? Xie said, if you don't do anything bad, are you afraid of ghosts knocking on your door? Zhang Xuning muttered in a low voice, don't you allow people to go to the wrong door. Xie stopped talking and looked at her. Zhang Xuning immediately buried her head and didn't dare to raise the bar again. Mr. Xie is right, how powerful a ghost is, how can he not know the door? Xie. He put down the teacup and asked her again, why did you save Zhang Bao? Zhang Xuning's face was obedient, but her brain was already spinning rapidly. If you tell the truth, you will definitely die. But if you want to tell all lies, I'm afraid that Xie won't believe it. So, she immediately had a compromise idea, and forcibly unloaded the resistance and defense in her heart, making herself look weaker and more sincere at the moment, and said, Xuanning first arrived in the palace, helpless. Mr. and Yan Lin, and Her Royal Highness the eldest princess wanted me to enter the palace, and I was in the limelight, and the other companions naturally regarded me as an enemy. If there is no one to take care of him, if he encounters the incident in Sinning Palace, every step is dangerous, and he doesn't know how he will die in the future. I was afraid, so when I came back, I passed by Cunning Palace, and I thought that if I could save the little eunuch, maybe it would be useful in the future. Xie was silent when he heard this. Zhang Xuning's voice lowered, defending herself, my mind is impure, but others haven't given me a chance to be a good person. When my husband saw what I had done, he only blamed me, but he never put himself in my shoes. What happened in Sinning Palace, and how big the implication was afterwards, no one knew better than Xie. At this moment, when Zhang Xuning mentioned it, his eyes changed.
末了问他，你心里委屈。
Zhang Xuning nodded, grievances. Xie was silent again. Zhang Xuning's heart was beating wildly, and she was slightly afraid when she raised her eyes, but she still hid a little hope, and asked tentatively, then Zhang Bao is really so powerful, will he be promoted by Wang Xinyi in the future? This looks like he didn't know that Zhang Bao was so powerful, but he just learned from him. Xie couldn't help but want to distinguish the real from the fake. I just lifted my eyes, and saw her sitting behind the piano table with her hands on her lap, her long dark eyelashes moist, and her snow-white cheeks still hung with tears that had not been wiped off before, and finally turned her mind and said, that's it. He said to her, Wang Xinyi has this plan, but things in the palace are also changing rapidly, and one person who is optimistic today may be defeated tomorrow. Some operations in the palace are not bad, but if you are not accidentally involved in the battle, it may not be harmful. I am entrusted by Yan Lin, and I have to be invited by Ling Zun, so I will remind you a few points. You should be careful yourself, and never make a mistake. The words wrong step are meaningful. Zhang Xuning knew that what he was referring to was definitely not as simple as showing favor to Zhang Bao so that someone in the palace would take care of him, but he was afraid that he was also warning himself not to want to use Zhang Bao to accuse him of his anti-evil intentions. Where would he dare not be obedient? She narrowed her eyes and said, yes, Mr. Xie mentioned it. Xie said, Qin, you try again, I'll take a look. Zhang Xuning was still in the battle of wits with Xie with all his heart, but he didn't even turn the conversation, and directly talked about the Qin, so he was stunned for a long time before he reacted. After a long time, I still have to open a small stove for her. She also thought that she would let her go after talking about Zhang Bao. The banana is placed on the piano table. Zhang Xuning wanted to die. Xie Wei frowned slightly when he saw that she was not moving, and said, "I'll be fine in the afternoon. If you don't play, you will spend it here." "Who wants to spend it here with you? It's even more terrifying than staying with Lord Yama." Zhang Xuning weighed the two phases. After all, the desire to survive overshadowed the little backbone, took a deep breath, sat up straight, dropped his fingers, and stumbled to play a short section of Xie Weijiao's Immortal Weng exercise. This song, also known as Tuning the Strings, is a finger-opening piece that most beginners know, and is mainly used to practice fingering. Although Zhang Xuning didn't touch the piano in the hall, he deliberately memorized this small section of the opening finger song. At this moment, although the harmony fingering is not accurate, there is nothing wrong with it. Xie Wei looked at her fingers and only said, "Keep playing." Zhang Xuning didn't dare to say anything. She held it in her heart in one breath, and when the 10 fingers of her hands were raised again, they collapsed more and more tightly. "This time, I just pointed down, and the first one was heavy." Xie Wei got up and walked over to her piano table to take a closer look. It's just that the more he looks, the more Zhang Xuning makes mistakes, and he doesn't even play it the first time. Xie Wei knew that she was afraid of herself, but this was also an inexplicable matter, and he always had no distractions in the matter of the qin, so he said, "This song is corresponding, and the end of each sentence is scattered and pressed. Your strings are pressed too tightly, and you should put it looser when playing." Zhang Xuning tried to relax and played again. Xie Wei only said, "Rotten wood is difficult to carve," and saw that although her right hand seemed to be loose, the 5 fingers of her left hand were still curled up, and the fingering was not right, so he frowned, leaned forward slightly, and stretched out his hand. Zhang Xuning's fingers are as thin as peeling onion roots, and there is a faint powder under the transparent nails, which is inaccurate in fingering, and it looks good when pressed on the strings. When I was learning the piano, I took off the jade bracelet and bracelet. Xie Wei originally wanted to teach her the correct fingering, but as soon as she got closer and lowered her eyes, she saw that the thin wrist was exposed, and the scar that was used to take blood was like an old thorn, crawling on the snow-white skin. Although it is light, it is still a little hideous and dazzling. His finger just poked out, and he paused for a moment. Zhang Xuning felt that she was much better than the first time after playing it just now, and she was thinking that she had made progress and deserved a compliment, but she didn't expect Xie Wei to beat her back with a sentence of "rotten wood is difficult to carve," and she didn't expect him to suddenly reach out to him. At this moment, the whole person's scalp was numb. Looking at Xie Wei's gaze again, it fell on the scar on her wrist impartially, and for some reason she was suddenly so scared, lest she be touched by him, so she hurriedly stood up. Bang dang! She was sitting at the piano table, but suddenly got up and hurried, hit the edge of the table in front of her, tripped the brocade stool behind her, and suddenly the table toppled several times, and even her whole person screamed and leaned back. Xie Wei immediately stretched out his hand when he saw it. His azure crane, with wide sleeves, swept through Zhang Xuning's eyes as if he had taken a ride in the wind. And then firmly hugged the Jiaoan Gukan. With a bang, the piano table fell, the brocade stool also fell, and Zhang Xuning fell into the thick velvet blanket, a little painful, and her eyes were a little dull. The banana fell safely in Xie Wei's palm. He stood with his piano in his arms and looked at her. "Be quiet." In addition to being quiet, it is still quiet. Xie Wei. Something seems wrong? Zhang Xuning. No, nothing seems wrong. Chapter 55, Denial. The piano table was quite heavy. Xie Wei took it up with a hook of his toes, and then put the banana in his hand back upright. Only then did he look at Zhang Xuning, as if he was wondering whether to help him. Where did Zhang Suning dare to let him help? She fell neither very hard nor very painful, and when she saw Xie Wei put the piano down, she hurriedly stood up with the thick velvet blanket and said, "It's Xuanning who is reckless, but fortunately the piano is fine." Xie Wei glanced at her and nodded, "Yes." Zhang Suning. He even answered yes. Although it was her own fault that she fell, it stands to reason that she can't blame Xie Wei, but she lost such a big person, and she was inevitably angry. At this time, she secretly thought, Zhang Sha didn't get married in his previous life, first, because he was ruined by Yao Shi's reputation, and secondly, because he was unlucky to meet her. Xie Wei didn't know if he could see the dissatisfaction in her heart, so he only pointed to the piano and said, "To play the piano, you need to be calm, and there are no distractions. You are not reckless when you encounter problems, but you have reckless behavior, and the more you want to play well, the more you talk about it. As the saying goes, if you want to hurry, you can't reach it. Therefore, I will not teach you to learn the piano today, it is useless to learn, you can sit down in front of this piano." Zhang Suning sat down as she said and asked, "Then what do you learn?" Xie Wei had turned around and walked to the long table, picked up a piece of sawnwood in his hand, and replied, "Don't learn." Zhang Suning was stunned. Xie Wei said lightly, "Before you sit quietly on the piano, when will your mind calm down, when will you learn the piano?" Calm? Isn't learning the piano just a matter of technique? What does it have to do with being still? Zhang Suning only felt that Xie Wei was deliberately looking for a way to toss himself, and when he sat there, his heart was not calm, but he became more restless. But Xie Wei didn't pay attention to her. The last time, the chain that had been cut for almost 3 years was destroyed due to an attack on the floor, which made him bored for a while, and now he started to choose the wooden chain again, but he planned to cut 2 pianos at the same time. In this way, it is not too unlucky, and both pianos have an accident. So at this moment, I repeatedly compared the pieces of wood in front of me, trying to pick out the 2 best ones. Zhang Suning sat behind the piano, and at first her mind was full of thoughts, but after thinking about it too much, she felt that just thinking about it was boring. It's hard to sit here and do nothing. Her eyelids gradually fought, and she had to put her eyes on Xie Wei's body, watching him select wood, take a rope and ink ruler to measure, and compare over there, revealing a sense of rigor and harshness, not like an imperial master, but like a fastidious craftsman in the Tagu market. And the man stared at the pieces of wood, picked up this piece and put it down, picked it up and put it down, and didn't pick it out for a long time, as if it was difficult to make a decision. Zhang Suning looked at the corners of her mouth and couldn't help twitching. "I didn't see it, the people are not good, and there are still a lot of problems." It was close to noon when school ended, and the windows of the side hall were also open. Xie Wei thought about it for a long time, and after choosing the wood, he looked up and estimated the hour. It was almost noon, and it was not good to let Zhang Suning learn the piano here hungry, so he wanted to open his mouth and let her go. But unexpectedly, when he turned his head, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a white shadow out of the corner of his eye. "It's a snowy kitten. I don't know where it came from, and I don't know when it came." The size of a palm, with dark blue eyes, full of milk, he was squatting on the edge of the window, looking into the hall, looking like he was about to jump in to see what was going on, and he also called out in a low voice. Xie Wei's eyelids jumped, his body stiffened slightly, and he took a step back quietly. Zhang Suning, who was originally sleepy, was a little more awake when she heard this voice, raised her head and followed the voice, and her eyes couldn't help but bloom with surprise. "Ah, where did the kitten come from? So good." She got up and tried to pick up the cat. But when he stood up, he remembered that he was sitting upright and meditating, and couldn't help but stop and look at Xie Wei. Xie Wei frowned, didn't pay attention to her eyes at all, and raised his voice to call, "Someone is coming." The little eunuch who was waiting outside the hall immediately came in. "What do you command, young master?" Xie Wei's eyes were frosty, and as soon as his fingers moved, he was about to point to the snow-like kitten on the edge of the window, but when he was about to point, he withdrew his hand and said, "I don't know which palace the cat slipped out and came here, and took someone to ask. Fengchen Hall is a pure place to read, don't let these little things come in and disturb in the future." The little eunuch suddenly trembled, and hurriedly said, "Yes." Then he quickly stepped forward and picked up the kitten. He said, "The slave will ask someone to ask, and in the future, he will strictly check it, and do not let these little things into the temple." Jiang Xuning opened her mouth slightly, seeing that the little eunuch took the cat away. She was already dissatisfied with Xie Wei in her heart, but at this moment, she added 3 points, and turned her head to secretly vent her anger with her eyes. "It's just that when I turned my head, I suddenly felt a little strange. Was Xie Wei that far from the window edge in the first place?" When the little eunuch took the cat off the window edge and withdrew from the hall, he inadvertently put down the ink line in his hand, turned around and walked to the bookcase on the other side and picked up a newspaper to read, and the distance between him and the cat was more than a foot away. Jiang Xuning suddenly felt indescribably strange, and an unprecedented bold idea popped up from her mind. In her last life, she also had cats. "Once I hugged a chubby cat to visit the Imperial Garden, and bumped into Shen Ju walking through the Imperial Garden with a group of ministers, talking about things in the court and the field, so he naturally stopped to salute. But unexpectedly, when she bent over, the flower cat actually jumped to Xie Wei's feet, and stretched out his fleshy claws to grab Xie Wei's hanging clothes, as if he usually jumped up to catch butterflies, and he was cute and cute. She was amused. As a result, as soon as he raised his head, he saw Xie Wei's face darkened, his eyes moved from her cat to hers, and he took a step back. Jiang Xuning was the queen at that time, but he was not afraid of him, but he was disgusted with her like other courtiers, so he even disliked the cat with her, so he didn't give a good face, bent down and picked up the cat, circled it in his arms, and said coldly to the cat, "Look at you, don't look at who is playful, fortunately, our master is magnanimous, otherwise I will turn around and pick your skin." With that, she turned around and left. He didn't even take a look at Xie Wei's expression. Although I think that this speculation is a bit unbelievable on Xie Wei, what if Xie Wei really didn't dislike her at that time? The little eunuch had already taken the cat out, but Jiang Xuning looked at Xie Wei, and there was a bit of wisdom in his eyes. But before Xie Wei's gaze could turn back to her, this thought immediately disappeared, as if she hadn't thought about anything just now. "Mr. Xie." Xie Wei still stood far away from the window, and then said, "It's not early, you are still not quiet, learning the piano is a watermill, let's go back today." Jiang Xuning's heart was finally finished, and she immediately saluted and said goodbye. Unexpectedly, she was just about to withdraw before she walked to the door, and heard Xie Wei add lightly in the door, "You will come again tomorrow afternoon." With a bang, the solace of her feet slipped and stumbled on the threshold, so she almost didn't fall. Finally stood firm, but he was so angry that he was smoking. In the end, he could only grind his teeth secretly, and said word by word, "Mr. Xie raises his love, and the student will come back tomorrow."
星号
When she came out of the Fengchen Palace, she realized that she was so dizzy that she didn't even take the chain back, and she wanted to turn her head to get it, but when she thought that Xie Wuxing might still be in the hall and hadn't left, she immediately dispelled this idea. Anyway, she doesn't practice when she goes back. Placing the piano in Xie Wei's place also saves the effort of moving back and forth. So he walked back empty-handed. Fengchen Hall to Yang's Hizai is only a few steps, and there are not many palace people passing by in the road. Just walking, I heard a laugh. A few of them are familiar. Zhang Xunning's steps suddenly stopped, and when he looked forward, he couldn't help but be slightly startled. Under the Vermilion Palace wall outside Yang's Hizai, there was a young man wearing a blue robe, with a long and straight body. Even if there was no prancing horse galloping at the moment, there was a bit of flying and blazing between the eyebrows and stars. It's just that when I saw her by mistake, the bottom of my eyes darkened. Yan Lin forgot what he was talking about, and he forgot what he wanted to say next, and even the many people standing beside him and in front of him seemed to have disappeared, and their eyes were full of only the shadow in front of them. Shen Zai, Xiao Shu and the others met Yan Lin and them when they went to Cunning Palace to ask for peace today, because they wanted to go back to Yangtze fast, and a group of nobles from their families were going to Fengchen Hall to find Mr. Xie, so they were on the same road and had to say goodbye when they came here. Shen Zai and Yan Lin have known each other since childhood, and they are playmates. She was about to say that Ning Ning was left in the hall by Mr. Xie today, and she didn't know if he could meet him in the side hall, but in the middle of her words, she saw Yan Lin's gaze pass over everyone and look behind them. So he turned his head to look. When she saw Zhang Xuning, she was very surprised, and hurriedly beckoned to her, "Ning Ning, you can be regarded as coming out, we are worried about you to death." If it was usual, Zhang Xuning should have been amused by Shen Zai. Maybe she thought about Shen Zai holding her hand and telling her to learn from Xie Wei, and she would slander her worries for not being worth it. But now I can't laugh at all. She walked over in silence. Xiao Shu, Yao Shi and others were all there, and their eyes were on her and Yan Lin. Walking with Yan Lin were also a few young men with faces, dressed in gorgeous clothes, and they were expected to be honored by the emperor to enter the palace to listen to the scriptures. One of them looked very small, only 14 or 15 years old. The station is closest to Yanlin. First, he saw Yanlin looking at Zhang Xuning, and then heard Shen Zai call Ning Ning, so he clapped his hands, and suddenly realized, and smiled at Yanlin, "Is this the second girl of the Zhang family? Brother Yan Lin always hid in the past and didn't let us see it, but today it can be regarded as seeing it." In and out of the words, he also knew the relationship between Yan Lin and Zhang Xuning. Everyone laughed teasingly. Only Yan Lin didn't laugh. Seeing her so happy, King Yanping's words pulled him into the bottomless abyss, making him feel that the girl in front of him was clearly standing in front of him, but it was as far away as a cloud in the sky. The young man in a blue robe solemnly looked at a still green face, and only said, "His Royal Highness the King of Yanping, don't joke, I and the second girl Zhang are just playmates, and it's just in private. If the nonsense reaches the ears of my father, it will be light to beat and scold me when I am tired, and it is important to break the name of the second girl, please be cautious." The young king of Yanping was stunned for a moment. Shen Zai didn't react. Xiao Shu next to her moved her eyebrows, raised her eyes to look at Yan Lin, and was a little surprised. Yu and the others were surprised, and suddenly turned into schadenfreude. After making trouble for a long time, it's a matter of Yan Shiza not treating her. Yan Lin looked at Zhang Xuning, his gaze was extremely serious, as if he would miss a glance at her, and he wanted to carve her to his heart. There was clearly a place that was broken open and bleeding. But he curled his lips and smiled at her. "His Royal Highness King Yanping is young and unscrupulous in his words, and I hope that the second girl Zhang will not be blamed." At this moment, Zhang Xunning's eyes were damp. She had to bury her head in a hurry to hide her embarrassment. Others can't understand it, but how can she not know? The Yanji Marquis mansion is in danger. Yan Lin already knows and truly loves her, so he will no longer rely on his former youthful nature, nor will he no longer wish that the whole world would know that he likes her. Instead, he wants to get rid of all ties with her. Didn't want her to be implicated, nor did he want to ruin her reputation, just like Zhang Sha took the initiative to withdraw from Yaofo. The fingers hanging by her side clenched quietly, forcing the tears back, and she also looked at the young man, wanting to answer something, but in front of these many people, she couldn't say a word. I dare not say it.